we'd like to start with item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies.
Just apologies from Councillor Bain.
Councillor Austin contacted me to say he wouldn't be attending because he's at the opening of the Northumberland line at Bedlington. Item 2 on the agenda is minutes. So we've got minutes of corporate services economic growth on 2nd of February, and also the minutes of the extraordinary corporate services, which was 3rd of December, which was the following. Can we agree that those minutes of those meetings are accurate? Agree?
Yeah.
Thank you. Item 3 is disclosure of members' interests. Does anyone have anything on today's agenda that they need to disclose which haven't previously been disclosed to the council? Anyone? Anything forward? Okay then. So we'll move on to item 4, which is the forward plan of cabinet decisions.
Yeah, this report is in 2 parts. Decisions already taken by cabinet and decisions to be taken. So the members' information, but at the same time, you would like to identify for future inclusion in this work programme. If you like yourself in the chair.
Okay. We move to item 5, advanced Northumberland presentation. We have Stephen Houghton, who is Chief Executive of Advanced Northumberland, and his team, and they're going to give us a presentation on behalf of Advanced Northumberland. That's your Stephen. Thank you. Your team, and if anyone has any questions, you can leave it to the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Because there are some relatively new members, councillors, we thought we'd take the opportunity to take what we're about as an organisation and spend just a couple of moments in terms of what we actually do. We'd also like to talk about our governance as well, so people have some idea of the way in which we're governed as an organisation. We will talk about our performance this year, together with a brief insight into what we're planning in the coming years as well, and then have to take questions at the end. To help me do that, you'd be pleased to hear it's not going to be me talking all the time, but I've got some of my team with me. So from the right, we've got Richard Mansell, who's our Finance Director, Andrew Wiley, who's our Head of Marketing and Communications, and William Thompson, job title forward.
Company Secretary and Executive Director of Governance and Sustainability for all business.
See why I didn't try them. Yeah, so if you could bear with us, we'll run through. I'm not looking to do it quickly for any other reason other than to get to the end, so you can ask us all questions. Happy to answer any questions at all. So first slide for us is a little wordy. We spent a little bit of time just trying to re-establish what we were as an organisation, and that was listening to a lot of feedback from a lot of people. I've been with the business 2 years now. We've eventually arrived at sort of trying to describe ourselves as the words that are on the screen there, a property investment and development business. There's a number of words in there, however, that do mirror those the County Council has in their various statements as well, improving prosperity, tackling inequalities and driving economic growth. So that is done very much in support of Northumberland County Council. We see ourselves as the delivery vehicle for your council, and that's how we position ourselves. Because there's a lot of words there, we tried to get it down to 3 words. So we're about building better futures. That's what we're about, and hopefully in the next few minutes you'll get some sense as to how that transpires in real life. We have 5 primary business areas, and the idea is that they all work together to optimise what this business can do. We have Essentials, our own house building unit, which we'll touch on shortly, building around. We're getting up towards 200 houses a year within Northumberland. We have our own projects team that supports a lot of the work that's done by Sarah and Maria and the team in the County Council, project managing large projects, both of our own and the County Council's. We have our own homes and maintenance team. We're the largest private landlord in Northumberland, about 1,400 homes, right from north to south and across to the west of the county as well. We have a team that maintains those homes. We have our own investments in commercial. So we have a number of business parks, industrial parks across the county. Either whole parks or units within those parks that we manage as a landlord. But we are managing all that. So we're earning money from that, and we're attracting new businesses the region through that part of the business as well. That part of the business works particularly closely with Sarah and Maria and their teams, making sure that we can develop some of the ideas that can as well. And last but certainly not the least, the sustainability part of our business. Branded now as Green Futures, that's a separate company, but it's managing BND assets within the county, and hopefully in the future a whole host of other things that we believe can both make money that we can reinvest back in our business and can lead to a sustainable future in Northumberland. That's the business. And important to note that we're not just about one part of the county, and one of my aims is that as a business, we diversify right across the county. There is obviously a lot of our activity is centred around South East Northumberland, because that's where a lot of the economic activity is. But we do want to extend into rural areas as well, and we're active up in Berwick, and we've got housing projects up there, and we're looking to extend further west. So one of our aims is to make sure that we're covering the whole of the county and not just one part of it. If I could pass across to William, who's going to touch a little bit on how we are governed. I think it's important that you know the controls that are in place in our organisation. William, could you cover that for us?
Thank you, Stephen. So that's the board of Advanced Northumberland. We have 7 board members, and 8 is being recruited eminently. 3 years ago, all of the directors were just council members or officers, and this reflects the board composition of a more commercial makeup. We have 4 independent non-exec directors who have been in place for coming up to 3 years in May. They bring a lot of experience from the corporate commercial world, legal, HR, PR, and accountancy, and wide experience and built environment. We have 2 executive directors, Stephen and myself, who are in the company. And we have a key link. There's only one NCC officer appointment as a director, and that's Tony Hilton, and from Sarah's team to ensure that there's that operational link as well with what we're doing, with what the council needs to see. There was a vacancy here following the departure of Jeff Reid, who was the chair, and Andrew Moffat was appointed in August of last year. The structure there is quite a complex chart, but I think the key bit I want to flag out is that the board is controlled and run, and the company is owned by the Cabinet Shareholder Committee. It is Northumberland County Council that is our shareholder, but under law, the actual entity that governs and uses the powers of shareholder is the Cabinet. The Cabinet has delegated that control and power to the Cabinet Shareholder Committee. So that they comprise the leader, the deputy leader, and the Cabinet Portfolio Member for Finance and Value for Money, Councillors Oliver, Wearmouth, and Sanderson. Obviously, there is a key appointment in the shareholder representative, who is in that box at the bottom left. Was Jan Willis as the Section 151 officer, and is currently Alison Elston as the Section 151 officer. And that role is essentially the go-between, the liaison between the Cabinet Shareholder Committee, the shareholder, and the board and the executives. Stephen and I meet with the shareholder representative and Simon Nielsen, the Exec Director of Place and Regeneration, on a monthly basis to ensure that we discuss operational matters as well as governance matters. So there's a 2-way dialogue with what's going on in the company and what the council priorities are. So that is the linkage between the council and the company. The council is also our banker. So we've got various interfaces. The shareholder committee delegates through the articles of company the day-to-day running of the business to the board, and the board delegates the day-to-day business running of the business to the chief executive. We've got that link on a monthly basis, but there are certain aspects of what we can and can't do that are controlled by our governance document, the articles, to balance the operational fluidity we need in this commercial business, would reflect the ownership of the council as any shareholder would, with certain matters that we cannot take without shareholder approval, and they are known as reserved matters. And there are 37 reserved matters under our current governance that we would say we want to do as a company and then as a board, and then we approach the shareholder for their approval and endorsement, so that there's that ultimate say on certain aspects that are deemed significantly important for shareholders of the county. The board has two committees that meet. The audit committee meets 4 times a year, ably assisted by the county's internal audit team, and we have a nomination and remuneration committee that meets twice. I think that's the main aspects of that stuff. I just wanted to address a perceived misconception that I picked up last week, that the role of the shareholder representative seen as the person who controls us, and that's not the case. It is definitely the Cabinet Shareholder Committee with the shareholder representative as the day-to-day interface, arranging meetings, arranging decisions, but it's definitely the Cabinet Shareholder Committee that controls us through those 37 reserved matters.
So that might sound quite complex, but we were just keen to let the committee know that there's been a lot of work done in the last couple of years to make sure that governance is clear. It might not seem it, but it is a lot clearer than it was. And there are clear lines of responsibility. So there has been a lot of work, given what might have happened in our history, to re-establish those governance links. And I think we're now in a place where there is clarity in terms of who's doing what and how we're run and organised. So I personally feel that we're far better placed in that respect. Happy to take any questions at the end on that issue. Before I pass across to Richard from a financial position, it's going to get a little complicated because we had assumed within our original budgets that our business was to be subject to some refinancing proposals. They're not complete yet, but that means we're going to be talking about 2 sets of numbers, one of which was refinancing in place. But then if that doesn't happen for whatever reason or doesn't happen quickly, we have half an eye on another set of numbers. So just to explain why it might get a little complex here, Richard might explain it better than I, if you're wondering what we're trying to show.
What's the acronyms? Can you explain the acronyms?
Yes, so EBITDA is Annual Interest, Tax, Depreciation and Amortization, which is actually both primarily profit before tax, revaluation and interest. Hopefully, an operating profit is another way of looking at it. PBT is profit before tax.
Anyway.
And that also excludes revaluation. We don't track that as part of our financial accounts, but we do, well, in recent years, benefit from some revaluation gains, but we don't focus on those in these numbers here. So thank you, Stephen. This slide, as was to reiterate our position from last year, FY25, we were very proud to not only meet but exceed our budgeted profit of 2.1 million by 0.1 million. In the current year, 2026, as Stephen referenced, there are 2 parallel sets of numbers here. The column on the left represents our original budget, which had assumed that the refinance would go ahead. And the column to the right is the ultimate position, should that not be in place for the current year. In both instances, we are 0.3 million ahead of our budgeted profit. That's based on the end of February position. We're currently closing the March position, but we will either meet or exceed that. In the 12 months this month is closed out. But really good result this year. We've seen growth in EBITDA, which shows we're over time becoming less reliant on disposals. The sort of call in our business activity is increasing, but been a positive step this year. In 27 and 28, that's year 1 and 2 of our new 10-year plan, which is based on refinance, but again shows good growth in both revenue and underlying profitability. So profit is important to us, but equally about contributes currently averaging 25 to 26 million pounds per year in APP because of revenue. That's a combination of either payment that bank makes through servicing its debt, raising to average 14 million pounds per year, and over 11 to 12 million pounds through either direct payment of rates and capital back or rates backs generated by our asset base. Over the last 10 years, that contribution has totaled 341 million pounds of revenue for NCC. In terms of the interest, we appreciate that's not without its cost. NCC will be incurring interest on the funds that it draws down itself, though we understand a fairly healthy margin is applied when calculating the rate that the banks pays. So bit of context, our most recent loans have been at 8.21% interest. So, yes, a good market on that front. Ready business, we focus a lot on cash. That's very important to us. Been one of my areas of focus since joining just under a year ago now. The slide shows our previous position and an upwards trend in the cash balance. You'll notice slightly rocky. We have quite large interest payments in particular due every 6 months, which is tracked here. So that reflects both interest and loan repayments being made, causing the drops. But overall, an upwards trend. We currently have circa £10 million in the bank and forecast an average over the next 12 months of £10.2 million, which we feel is very healthy for a business of our size. Now this slide sets out our funding position, and as it stands, the NCC has lent advance total of £269 million. That's the outstanding loan balance, and that compares to asset value owned by advance of £334 million. So looking back a few years, the trend starting in 2023, that loan balance had been sat at £277 million, so an £8 million decrease over those years. Alongside that, our asset base has been growing year on year, which as a result increases the loan to value percentage, which has dropped there from 87%, currently down at 81%. So effectively, the proportion that we owe NCC as a portion of our assets is reducing year on year, which shows an increasingly healthy financial position from that point of view. The £8 million reduction in loan slightly maps the underlying nature of our drawdowns and repayments. So during that period, we've actually drawn down 21 million of loan, but repaid 29 million. That drawdown is used in our development projects, which typically is on a 3-year repayment cycle. So we do continue to draw down a large portion of loan, but repay more year on year. And in the meantime, use that funding to achieve our regeneration delivery across the county. Stephen touched on refinancing. Post planned refinance that, sorry, still on just on the final column, so post refinance, once that goes ahead, that would reduce the overall loan balance and giving a very healthy 56% loan value ratio, which put us on a strong financial footing.
If I can ask you just to take 2 or 3 points away from that. First of all, delivery of profit has been really important for us. We'd like to think we're seen as an organisation that says we will do one thing. So we agree our budget for the council each year. It's really important for us as an organisation to hit those targets. So we hit last year's set of numbers. We are due, subject to whatever happens in the next 48 hours, year end being tomorrow night. We're due to hit this year's set of numbers after much hard work by the team. So I think that puts us in a slightly different position than may have been the case in the past. From a cash position, we're trying to establish ourselves as an organisation, as any commercial organisation that has, it's got sufficient money in the bank to do what it needs to do and not have to come cap in hand to the council, as may have been the case. We don't do that now. We're in a stable position. And then this idea of assets and debt, I know it can be quite complex to get around. We do have a debt. We have a debt of £269 million. Some of that, a large proportion of that is because we've got a whole lot of assets that we hold, buildings, workshops, warehouses around the county. We run as an operating business, so that debt is fairly stable. There is another amount of debt, 20 to 30 million each year, where we're borrowing from our bank at the council, and we're using that third profit to build new houses typically, or to develop other projects. So there is a split in terms of the debt that we have. We held there because we've got a lot of assets and put up quickly. Some of it we're using, or some of them is our banker. And earlier, making a margin on that. So we're turning capital into revenue there as well. So there are a number of benefits. But I guess the reassuring thing is that if worst case ever came to worst case, though, we're managing a portfolio that's going up in value, and the assets that our business has are greater than its debt. So that's a great position for us to be. One of the key assets that we do have is on the next slide, if you don't mind, Manor Walks. I'm going to touch very quickly on this because this is key to us, and there's been a lot of talk about Manor Walks. It's an important asset for the town of Cramlington. We have plans to raise its value from currently the revaluation about 80 million or thereabout, getting up towards 80 million. We need to raise its value eventually north of 100 million, the point at which it was bought. Our plan is to exit from Manor Walks, but we want to do it in an orderly fashion, and we want to spend money developing to raise the value of it. So we've got a 5-point plan to raise the value and to improve the quality of the asset there. As an operating facility, what I would say is it makes cash. It does make it money on a day-to-day basis. It's got great footfall as a regional shopping centre. It's one of the best in the UK. But we think it needs some more investment. We've got these 5 plans, one of which is the western entrance. So that photograph top right, that image, sorry, top right, is the western entrance. Next to the corner on the right. So we're looking to do that sooner rather than later. We've got plans to develop the southern terrace. That plan on the left is a large retail unit, and we're close to signing up a tenant for the development of what many of you will know as the former police station site. That will be coming soon. So that's going to be great news for the Manor Walks. We have the former library site, which we're close to developing as well. One of the assets that's underutilised at Manor Walks is the fact that there's a whole load of office space on the first floor that's not used. And we've got plans to redevelop that. First of all, to mitigate any rates having to be paid on that. So there's a significant amount of money going out on rates on empty, because those are empty properties. So we'd like to bring those back into use. And secondly, to raise some more revenue for us as well. We've got a cost management plan, which is maximising the revenue from the tenants that are on site. We've made some great work already. I think we're £100,000 of this year or thereabouts already, raising the revenue. And last but not least, we're aware that there are parking and transport issues, and we've got a plan that we're working through with town council and others to develop that as well. So there's a lot of effort going into Manor Walks. That's fairly fundamental in terms of the way that we're financed and run as a business. So we do want to exit. That's in our business plan, but we want to do it in the right way. We've got another 3 years to try and hit the targets and to complete that plan, to get ourselves out in an orderly fashion and to find a suitable buyer, which in the current climate you might say would be difficult, but we're hoping that things will improve. So a lot of the team's effort is in that space. I can pass it across to Alex, who's going to tell you a little bit more about what we're delivering at the moment.
So we've touched a lot on the financial figures. These are some of the figures that we've actually delivered on. It's everything from residents and businesses that we've supported to homes and communities that we've built. We've created just over 3,500 jobs. We have just under 4,000 residents across our rental fleet. We have 400 business occupiers in our workspace, light assembly, manufacturing units. We've secured over £180 million in investment. And we've had about £250 million in projects we've delivered, which I'll come on to on the next slide. We've built just under 900 homes across the county, of which 245 of them are affordable homes. If we just move on to the next slide. So this is an example of some of those projects that we've actually delivered on this year. We'll start on the top right. We've started on site at our Habitat Bank at Scotland Burn in Ashington to rewild that site. It's the equivalent of about 500 football pitches, which makes it one of the largest habitat banks in the northeast of England. We delivered on our Market Terrace development in Bedlington, which consisted of retail units and apartments above. All of those apartments are now re-let. We also started our site at Woodside Gardens up in Hampton, and that's an image of again our rental tenants moving into brand new houses to rent. It's also a sales scheme on that site as well, consisting of 2 and 3 bedroom houses and a selection of bungalows. Also delivered our second whole site up in Barrack, and I believe the last remaining houses are to be handed over to you in here tomorrow. And then finally in Blythe, we've delivered on our town centre regeneration project, the Market Pavilion, which consists of a cinema and creative spaces, the QTS data centre, and then the last image on the top left is the Northern Energy Park. which allowed us to widen the old Ashford dock, which allowed obviously large vessels to pass through it, and has allowed the cable manufacturing company JDR to run its operations, as you can see, from that image and access deep water. That's a selection of the projects we've done this year. I'm going to hand you back to Stephen, who will talk about some of the projects that we've got coming up.
Just in case Sarah picks me up on the data centre, we're not claiming full credits. But we own a lot of land in and around the data centre, and one of our key tasks there was to facilitate the delivery of power to the data centre. There's no endless problems. Our team has played a big part, and we'll have a role going forward. I'm hoping very, very soon. I was hoping today to be able to announce further developments around there, but we're hoping fairly soon to have a new tenant we can announce there as well. This very brief, and I'm aware of time, just sorry. This is some of the stuff that we're looking to deliver this year. And Councillor Robertson, I can say that we have a Starbucks and a B&M coming. I know I was berated for mentioning their names in a meeting before when I shouldn't have done. We have them now signed up, and we're going to be delivering that in addition to the other projects in Bedlington very soon. I mean, round Van Wart, I've touched on, there's some really exciting work coming there. There'll be a planning application going in relatively soon for that western development, and hopefully linking with some of the council facilities there as well. So that'll be a real positive for Framlington. Horton Park in Ashington, cinema has been the subject of much debate over the years. Again, we're days, weeks away of just finally announcing what's happening there. I know there's been some discussion about that coming. That's just a little premature, but we're just about there in terms of getting a contract with the builder. We hope to have spades in the ground in the next month or two. That'll be a real positive there, and we'll help develop that site in the middle of Ashington. And then on the housing front, we're now working up in Bellingham. So this is part of our move to try and move out of South East Northumberland and develop other parts of the county as well. So there's a housing development in Bellingham. Nearly said Bedlington twice, Councillor. And then lastly, for those of you who know Newbingham, we are now working on the site opposite the leisure centre, and we're looking to develop up 70 homes there, and there's a number of affordable homes there as well. So that's a key site for us that's been vacant for a little while. And as part of our programme, we're looking to develop some of these schemes for us. So there's a real mix coming forward. So there's a lot of positives. There's a commercial organisation of stuff that we can't quite announce yet, but we are close. We've been working really hard to get a number of projects over the line by tomorrow. We've got a lot of those done, but there's a few that are just not quite there yet, whether we can't announce, but we should see more coming from us in the very near future. Just lastly, Chair, I'm hoping we've given you a sense of the business in pretty good shape financially. We'd like to think it's now well organised, well governed, we're not saying well scrutinised as well in the coming months in this committee and others. But we have a plan that is now will be seeing its way through various committees in the coming months. This is now a 10-year plan. We established a 5-year plan last year when I first joined. We've now extended that out to 10 years. So this week we'll be coming through the various committees and setting out our plans for the foreseeable future. Refinancing or not, that's we'll look at that carefully. But there's some clear context there to how we're going to run ourselves, business, and the kind of projects that we're looking at. That's me. I'm yours, Chair.
If you've got all the members, Councillor Whelan, Councillor Oliver, anything you would like to add?
Not at this stage, I don't think, Chair. Thank you.
Members, do you have any questions for screening committee team? I'll give you a.
Come on, you know. No, I'll let everybody else have the go first. But if there isn't any, I've got a few. Stephen, something you mentioned about the sustainability there. You know how I feel about it. We've handed you a monopoly. Where's the profit going in that? Is it just going to the company coffers? And in other words, if there's an underperforming part of your company, is it paying off? Does it need to pay that off? Or is it held within sustainability?
The answer is a mix of all three, Councillor. So yes, there is each of the businesses within Advances run separately. We try and avoid as much as possible. We've not needed to do so recently. We keep the accounts for each separate, so we can manage each. what I don't want to happen is one part of the business, its performance being masked by somebody else's. So we keep a close eye on each separately. Some of the money is used to repay debt. And then some of it's will be getting used to reinvest into other projects. So my hope is that there's a couple of parts of the business that would like to invest more in, particularly the commercial part of the business. So we're looking to develop opportunities throughout the county. That's one area we feel as though we've underinvested in. But there are other projects like Manor Walks and others where there's a business case for investment that then leads to subsequent disposal at the right time. But also we've got the cinema as another example. We need to self-fund that within the organisation. So there is some cost funding, but we look carefully to manage each separately. We also want to invest in Green Futures as a business in its own right. We're looking to reinvest back into Green Futures. We'd like to buy more land, for instance, and set up more BNG. We feel as though there's probably a time-limited opportunity to make some money there, and to facilitate other developments. And there are some other things that we've got half an eye on, other projects, renewable energy, solar panels, for instance, on housing. We'd like to do more of that.
That's okay.
Yeah, and make some of our existing portfolio more energy efficient as well. So there's an thought that we do make sure we make money within each organisation.
When we're talking about housing here, in your last release, occupancy levels fell due to strategic decision to reduce refurbs. But I asked, why have you taken that decision? Is it liquidity? I mean, what is it?
No, so there's
Is it the view or?
positions actually changed, Councillor. So we're our targets that we set at the start of the year was to have a 95% occupancy within our portfolio. And that's typically when most housing organisations would seek to run, and in some cases higher. We had taken a decision to hold some votes previously, and those were primarily in the Hurst, whilst awaiting development of the Hurst master plan. So we didn't want to invest if it was going to be the wrong part of the Hurst or buildings that at some point would need to be knocked down to take development. We are still holding some in the Hurst, but while the decision was pending, we decided to reinvest. So we've actually invested a little more in the last 6 months, particularly to bring that void level up to 95%, because we didn't want people going without homes when we had homes sitting available. So we spent about £100,000 or thereabouts, something slightly different. In terms of getting that number back up, so we can actually, I'm really pleased actually that we're able to hand the keys over to people with a house in it. But that was a strategic decision to hold. Now we've said no, we'll invest back in those and bring those out.
But my last question then, probably a bit difficult to answer. Jan was going to give us a report on the debt equity swap. We still haven't had one. I'm going to ask you about your reorganisation. You've mentioned it a few times there. If it happens, this is how the figures look. If it doesn't happen, this is where the figures. And it's probably best for these guys to answer it. I'm just using it because it's about your structure. And I was wondering how you were going to organise that structure. And it seems as if you've got the two strands in place. For the first time, I've heard somebody say, if it doesn't go ahead, this is what happens. Now, I voted against it. I'll tell you straight out, because I didn't think it represented value for residents of this county, if you like. So I'll be interested to hear what's happened to this decision that we took nearly a year ago, or the majority of councillors took nearly a year ago, to do this. It doesn't seem to happen, and we're holding back our wholly owned company from developing the projects that I want to see.
Yes, certainly. I'll pick that up. Basically, work was happening constantly since the decision was made in March last year, and there was a sort of some legal work that needs to happen. There were valuations that needed to happen, and basically all of the sort of conditions to make what was agreed at full council sort of happen. They were working towards that. Circumstances have sort of changed in the meantime, so the council officers have taken a view
I think quite rightly, and very prudently, that we need to do some more work, and re-examine some of the options. So that work is currently happening at the moment. My own personal view is that we need to, it is something that needs to be done because the business is being constrained. But we have to do it properly. So that work is being done currently and or will be done shortly. We've also, obviously, Jan has left. And she was sort of leading on it. So we don't want to sort of rush into that again. John is arriving shortly. Alison was not very involved in it. So I think it's a very sensible decision just to basically, get the extra work done, make sure that we've got the sort of, the assurance in place that we need. And then hopefully we'll be able to sort of crack on with it in the not too distant future.
Just to add a little bit as well, I think probably I'll end up repeating what Nick said, but the time to do it, Malcolm, is the right time when all the conditions are right, to a significant degree because of the doubts that you expressed. It has to be right, it has to be value for the taxpayer, and it has to release the company to actually do the things that we said that we wanted it to do when we made that decision. That work was progressing quite well. As recently as probably January, February, and then we've had a huge change in terms of interest rates and likely headed our way, gilts, bonds, etc., etc. There's a huge amount of uncertainty. Now is not the time to step into that decision. And so, when things calm down, we'll probably revisit it a little bit more. In the meantime, as Nick says, there's a whole host of stuff that continues to go on. And just for anybody who wasn't here or doesn't remember the reason that we were doing that, it's because effectively Advance, inheriting a position over the course of many years from its predecessor, it's heavily leveraged. Great. So yeah, I think I would agree with you on that. There were decisions made about buying shopping centres, about other things that have left it with a huge amount of debt, and it really constrains it in terms of doing the things that we might want it to do. And those things, they may sound ridiculous until you're actually sat there trying to wrap your head around it. But it's things like you want some particular land developed and brought forward in order to facilitate an investment that will happen at some point in the future. It's really difficult to do because you end up with subsidy control issues and so on and so forth. If we feed the money into the company in order to do that, and yet logically the company is entirely owned and operated by us, there should be that freedom. What the refinancing was intended to do was to allow the company to have more of its own cash at hand, to be servicing debt less, because we would have taken on some of that debt where the decision was effectively made. It was made here in terms of that decision to buy Manor Walks, and then the company was effectively directed to do it, and that would, in the longer term and probably even the near term, allow the company to make those interventions freed from all of the subsidy control and all the other stuff, because they would be making it on their own back. That is not going to be available to us. We're going to have to be creative and think about how we create that platform, and not least in the context of some of the reports that you've got later on that you're looking at. It's frustrating, but we'll get the right time, and that's where it's at. And so we'll keep be involved, and we'll keep members informed as to when the opportunity is best arrived at, if that helps.
Just on Manor Walks, just plainly, if you do unwind from that in 29, as you're trying to do, does the money you get from that go back to council? Because that's a principal chunk of the debt carrying to the council, isn't it?
Yes, councillor. I mean, there's some finer detail to be agreed on that. That was one of the outstanding matters in terms of what went to the council and what might be agreed to Advance to undertake some further projects. So there was some detail, but yeah, there was a chunk of that was going to be used to repay some.
Nick, yeah, if I could just make a point, it was a sort of wide point, just prompted by something Richard said, and Stephen mentioned it earlier as well, about the council's borrowing and the council's lending to Advance. Stephen, I think, mentioned that there was a sort of aggregate interest rate of 8.1%. The council's aggregate interest rate on its borrowing across all borrowing, not just advances, is I think 3.46%. So that illustrates that the lending that the council has to advance is actually at a margin and is effectively subsidising other council borrowing. So I think that's really important to sort of point that out.
You might want to mention MRP though. In the context of that, but you also have the repayment bridge MRP, which is effectively that it's not filling our coffers hugely with cash because we have to pay off the debt to the public loans board. So eventually you would end up in a situation, as long as the Manor Walks continues to thrive, where the council has no debt, but the bank still has all of its debt, still is unable to invest in the centre or do anything, which is not good for the centre, not good for finance, and not good for the company. And it's a rather weird and perverse position there.
You seem to be trying to justify stuff here because of that spread in interest rate. What we should be looking at is the return to shareholders and dividends. Yeah, that's what the company's supposed to be doing here.
Yeah.
That's a commercial decision. This is more of why we put it in place.
Yeah.
There is obviously other work being done that we ask them to do that they don't make money on. Maybe they don't make as much as they should, but that's our decision to ask them to do that, and their decision to take it on. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But you can't justify the thing by talking about that spread in interest rates.
No, I'm not trying to justify it in any way, because if we could turn the clock back, we would never have paid what we paid for Manor Walks. So there are sort of two key metrics: there's the affordability of the debt, and there's also the sort of asset backing of the debt. And in Manor Walks' case, clearly we paid too much for it because the value has subsequently been less than we paid for it. So fortunately, Advance have been able to run very well and have been able to afford to pay the interest that we're charging them, and that. The point I was making earlier was that basically helps. It is a financial contribution into the council's coffers to cover other interest as well. But if we could wind the clock back, we wouldn't do it. And obviously, what we're trying to do is get an exit and valuation that doesn't crystallise a huge loss, because at the point at which we exit, we have to crystallise onto our P&L rather than our balance sheet. The loss in that year, and that's not something we want to do. So hence we have to try and, or Advance have to try and increase the value of the asset.
Councillor Nicholson,
Yeah, when you report 241 million contribution over 10 years, how much of that is actual net profit returned to the council, excluding sort of the loan interests and taxes?
Let's find out, Councillor Nicholson first, and then perhaps actually, I'm not trying to avoid the answer, I'm just trying to make sure I've got the right things. Slide relating to the answer.
Really, when came from the contribution slide, which is a slightly difficult question for us to answer in terms of the profit element, because this slide represents the revenue that is generated for NCC. To understand the profit on that, we have to understand the associated costs for NCC, which Advance isn't necessarily privy to. We've touched on the interest element. Based on number quoted beforehand, it seems as though circa half of that interest per year relates to profit. So arguably, 14 million per year would be profit for NCC. Be less than the council tax and rates. I'd imagine that would be largely net neutral for NCC or smaller uplift. But yes, from our perspective, we can only give the revenue figures and that's the profit element.
What I can say, Councillor, in the last 2 years, if we look at what happens until tomorrow and this last year, we're looking at a profit of 8.4 million. It's going to be reinvested. That is profit within our organisation, irrespective of anything else going back to the council. That's the position that we want to be in, Chair, in terms of not making mega profits, that's not what we're about. We're about delivering what we like, but we want to make sure we're making sufficient profit that we're an efficient company. And we can certainly have a look at some of the more detailed numbers, council, and have the evaluation. We can answer some of those questions. We are now a profitable organisation hitting the targets that are agreed.
Yeah, and also regarding your PVT, looking at the 2.2 million, that is at the moment and understandably rather low, sitting at around 3%. I think around 10 to 15% is sort of a consensual healthy figure to be at. And given that, you know, the current climate with, you know, all of the increases to every business in the land, with rising fuel costs, et cetera, which does have, you know, an impact on businesses. What do you have in place now then to mitigate a drop in your revenue? Because with a PBT that low, a drop in revenue, even a small drop in revenue could wipe out any profits.
So if we look at this year's number, councillor, we're expecting there a number around £6.2 million. That's getting up towards 9. I'm going to calculate wrong. 9, getting towards 10%, which is the number you suggest. The margin is not the be all and end all for us. You've got to look at the risk attached to that. But we're getting ourselves back now after a number of years where we weren't making a profit. We're getting ourselves back to another point where we're in a healthy position. We're looking to expand our revenue. Eventually, our ambition is to get to £100 million or something. But it's not all that revenue that we're to do with it. So we're getting toward that 10% margin that you suggest is where commercial potential we are. So I'm comfortable that we're in a far better place there now than we perhaps were when the lockdown was going on. Now, there are obviously the refinancing has an impact on that. And even at the lower numbers, I think we are moving in the right direction now. But I'm not saying that we haven't got work to do. But we've got a number of plans in place to make sure that we're undertaking the right projects with low risk now. I think we're more rigorous now in terms of the way that we spend our money than we have been in the past. We have a clear project management system with a series of gateways for each project, for instance, that we go through as a rigorous process where we assess each project and we make sure there's a clear business fit for each project and assess it on its own merits, taking account of grant aid, contributions from the council, our own cash as well. So I think from a systems point of view now, we're in a different place in the work. And that's what the team really to try and explain the difference. We have that independent board now, made up commercially minded people who will challenge us on this stuff. And believe you me, we do get challenged, and that's the right place for us to be. So I believe we're in quite a different place in terms of where we're in.
And Manor Walk, you know, you haven't sort of mentioned what you expect all of these improvements, you know, to come as a cost to yourselves. And is it to yourselves, or will, you know, the council be expected to partly fund some of that just to make it? And are you doing it just to make it saleable?
We'll take the last question first, councillor. So the answer to that is no, because we believe that Manor Walks is a key part of Cramlington. So we want to do the right thing by the community. So we're listening and we're liaising with town council to establish the right thing to do that. So first and foremost, we need to do the right thing for Cramlington. But we are undertaking, so some of those works are the right thing to do in a shopping centre like that. There's not been as much investment over the years. We're trying to write that. But ultimately, yes, we are looking to undertake these works with a view to, as well as actually adding value to Cramlington generally, they're going to add value to this retail part, and therefore will make it more saleable. And that remains our objective. We don't believe it should be in our ownership. We like to undertake development, get them to the right point, and then look at them on, and then we use that any revenue collectively from the council ourselves, and we go and do the same hopefully somewhere else. Once we've delivered a project, there's not really much point in us holding on to that project. Sometimes you think you get the cash. But generally, our ethos is we'll go in, we will regenerate, we will improve, and then we'll somebody else take it on and we'll move on to the next. That's the way we work. Lastly, in terms of the contribution to the project, it will need some investment from many partners. We will put our own money in. We will reinvest some of the profit that we've talked about. We will need to, as you would with any venture like this, we'll take loans. We will come to the county council and ask them to contribute on a commercial lending basis. But we'll also seek to get grant funding where we possibly can do the combination. And typically that's the same for all of our projects. It's getting that mix of all three to make sure it's done as efficiently as possible. We'd like to rely on county council less. If we build our profits, hopefully that will be the case and we'll be able to self-fund at the moment. Whilst there isn't a refinancing in place, we will be necessity to come to the county council for something.
Did you have a approximate cost for your plans?
We're still waiting for some numbers to come in. So if I take the Western Entrance development, for instance, it's of the order of 10 million that we've invested there. And we put a chunk of that, we've come with a business case to the county council, and we're going to seek to run. But some further work to be done in getting to the bottom of some of the numbers. A lot of it depends on the scale of the development, how far we go.
Okay, thank you. I do have a couple of questions for Nick. What would you see as the financial risk that the council would have to ultimately carry if the project underperformed?
I don't think I can actually, I mean, are you asking me to put a number to it or just describe where the risk lies?
Scale of the financial risk.
Well, I think the
Which project?
yeah, I mean,
What are you?
Well, I mean, the whole sort of, you know, when we've, you know, we've already got a debt. First of all, we've already got, you know, so what's the risk there if the company does underperform? You know, like I did say, I did have concerns about the PBT rate just being down that low. And it just takes, and now we've all got these huge outside pressures coming to us, you know, with the ongoing war. If, you know, these plans for not being able to bring the results up to scratch to be able to, because I do understand that part of the sale would fund back some of these debts. So what is the financial risk to us as a council should that not happen, for example?
Well, I think the first thing to say about Manor Walks is that although, as I said a few minutes ago, we did pay too much for it, it is a good shopping centre and it is performing well. And it has high levels of occupancy and it has a decent rent roll. So, and that's something that is monitored very regularly by the council as well as obviously the advanced board. And I've seen firsthand that they're really not doing that. And, so I think Manor Walks is clearly the biggest single asset in the advanced portfolio, and therefore by the very nature of the fact that it's the biggest asset, it is probably the highest area of risk. But I'm not concerned about the actual operating risk. I'm concerned that we paid too much for it, and I'm concerned that we need to find a way to exit. And I think what I've seen, the work that they're doing in terms of actually coming up with an exit plan is very well thought through. And the proposals, they're basically looking at a way to try and increase the value by more than the extra that they have to spend on improving the asset to increase that value. So there is obviously an element of risk there. There is in any commercial property development. I couldn't quantify that risk. I'm not sure anybody could. But I think, you know, if you start with a good performing asset as the basis for further investment, then that's a lot safer than putting money into something that isn't performing. So I think there's some risk, but it's being managed properly. In terms of other stuff across the portfolio, I think the rest of the portfolio is pretty sort of divided. So, you know, the biggest risk to any business at the moment is the economy. But I think the types of activities that Advance do are pretty resilient. And, you know, people need housing. The commercial property side of Advance is very good with high levels of occupancy. So I don't think there's a risk there. I mean, probably less risk there than for many other people in that sort of arena. So yeah, that's my personal view, and I'm not an expert.
Yeah, irrespective of any refinancing, council, there is a risk of not doing anything in finance as well.
Yeah.
If there is not investment in that, the value of that asset will diminish over time. And that would be a concern that I've got, and that's a concern that we have. That's not something I just wanted to flag that there is that danger. So we think that sensible investment, they will have a focus. There is a talking over a risk, there is a risk always of doing nothing.
And just to be clear, I know you talked about sort of the governance side of it, but I wasn't really clear on that. Who is ultimately accountable for the financial performance? Is it the board or the council as a shareholder? And if so, is that then the cabinet?
Yeah, I think all of the above probably. I mean, the board obviously has the first level of accountability, but the shareholder group is there to monitor that. The board has a lot of very experienced, very commercial people on it, and then obviously the exec team within Advance also very experienced, very commercial people as well. So. The accountability is shared primarily with the company itself, but then with the council as the 100% shareholder.
That's probably all the questions for all of them. So we have actually, well, Councillor Rowley has answered my question in replying to other questions. So I just really wanted to just come back on the Manor Walks. That I was a councillor here when that decision was made, and I think it just wasn't worth. So I think trying to reach a stage where we can sell it is a really good decision. So hopefully that does go ahead. I really just wanted to make sure myself that we weren't spending more than we needed to, but I think that's been answered. Yeah.
Councillor Dunn.
Yeah, thank you. I think, like you said, a lot of the questions have been answered, but my main sort of worry was the refinancing bit. I mean, is this report that we've got in front of us now, was this the annual report that we get of the committee from?
I think you get quarterly reports.
I can't remember how often. Do you also go to audit committee as well, don't you? And
I believe we come to this committee once.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And then we can do a committee council.
Yeah, it's just I can't get it clear in my mind why the refinancing thing is coming as a bit of a shock now, just looking at this, and it's come out of this report. So really, what is the risks about the refinancing? When is it going to happen?
I don't think.
And what reports? You mentioned that it would be going reports on the refinancing will go to various committees. What committees are they?
Yeah, so the decision was made by full council to give approval.
Yes.
Officers are wanting to take a look at that again in changed circumstances. I'm not quite sure what the proposal would be, but I think it would be probably to certainly take it back to scrutiny. But I can check on that.
I can add a little bit more. I mean, first of all, it's nothing. I wouldn't describe it as a shock or anything like that. There's money in the capital programme that you voted through. Thank you kindly in the budget to deal with this at some point at the right time. There had been a discussion and a debate and a vote in council previously to identify the trajectory. And the only thing that's really changing that is the market circumstances and making sure that all of the works that you'd sanctioned and that you would have expected to have happened as a result of that report way back when and the decision at the budget can be stepped into in an orderly fashion. And so with the slightly changed economic circumstances, there's just some work going on to make sure that is that when the right time will be and that it's done logically without any additional exposure. So hopefully that helps.
Presumably those reports or recommendations are going to go to cabinet, so will they be
They'll-
coming here for scrutiny?
You absolutely can do that, so we can bring that to scrutiny. It'll probably be a function of cabinet because you've delegated the decision effectively through the budget and through the previous votes of council. But it's an important step in a process, and so why wouldn't it? I would agree with you, councillor.
Yeah.
So that helps.
And the only other thing was, I think I requested quite a while ago that we've got a report on the Portland burn.
Yes.
I know we've sort of looked at it, had a couple of sentences on it today, but that wasn't quite the report that I was asking. So can I ask again for a report just to come back to scrutiny?
Can I just ask the Chair? I think there was a report done. I saw a report on Portland Burn. I think it went to Audit Committee. So I'm just wondering whether there's something already that exists that we could circulate to all members as a starting point. And then if the Scrutiny Committee have any further questions, they could always ask you to come back and answer those questions.
I can certainly, that was an introductory presentation as we were starting. I can certainly share that and then perhaps give an update as, we've been working very hard on it.
Yeah.
Councillor Jackson.
You mentioned about providing power for the QTS data centre. What would be the plans for doing that? Because I believe there's a second data centre coming further next door, and so obviously going to be a big problem or something that's going to be needed to be sorted to the area. How would you approach that?
So I won't comment on plans for any other particular development around the area, but what the reason we were able to lay claim to having an involvement in the data centre, we control a lot of the land. It allows connectivity between the national grid substation there and various developments around the area. So we are working with National Grid to look at expansion of their existing facility, which would in turn provide more power to the area. Our importance is partly we own the land upon which that facility would be expanded onto. And we also own a lot of the connecting routes to various land plots in and around that area. So sounds dead simple, this really. Believe you me, it's been very complex getting these cable routings and everything approved. So Advance controls the land on which the source of the power and also controls a large chunk of land which is earmarked and indeed has planning permission for one of the largest offshore wind turbine facilities to come on to land in Northumberland. So this is the SSER development, which is in the public domain and will hopefully sit on a large chunk of our land, and that will add to that power. So the really important part of the county, this, and there's a source of power, various sources, that will facilitate the development in and around us, and we have a significant role.
And so if you want to
Yeah, just briefly. So yes, thank you to Advance. They did an awful lot of work to enable that national grid substation to come about. I think that there's a screening or scoping request into the council at the moment. You'll be able to see it online on the planning portal. It's next to the existing substation that National Grid have on Advance land. A lot of back and forth to make sure that that was possible. You referred to a second data centre. That is not something really that we know an awful lot about, if I'm frank. I couldn't even tell you actually who the developer is, because the only contact that we've had that I'm aware of is via an agent. If they would like to make themselves known to us, we'd very much like to talk to them. I know that we might be on video. Hello to anybody watching. Get in contact so we can have a bit of a chat, because QTS, as you'll know, Councillor Jackson did a huge amount of work with the county council to make sure that there was benefit to the county, to residents, that this went forward in a planned way. So far, the only interaction that I'm aware of with that organisation that's proposing it, whoever it is some drop-in sessions, and that's literally been it. Not good enough. It needs to be better.
Well, they also mentioned about the possibility of the Alcan site, which mentioned about planning, obviously looking ahead and everything. It seems like there's good development for the area.
It is. I'm sure the chair through you, we'll touch on this maybe in the next bit, but a whole load of data centres can be a good thing and a bad thing. We worked very carefully with QTS to make sure that this was appropriate, that it didn't use up all of the power, electricity that we need for other employment uses. If a whole host of data centres come in, gobble up all of our employment land and leave us with no electricity, then we've got a problem. And that is why those folks and anyone else thinking about it need to make contact with us, because at the end of the day, if we're not satisfied, and I would hope that I speak for all of you in this, but please shout me down and say not. If we're not satisfied that those things are covered off, then I don't see how we could easily support the development of those sorts of activities.
Thanks.
It's a little bit more than an extension cable, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the many great things that Northumberland has, that connectivity to power is one of the most powerful things that we do have as a county, particularly in South East Northumberland, through existing grid connections, whether it be at Councillor Dunn's constituency at Linemouth or further down. Those are great selling points for us. So we're really pleased to be working with Sarah and her colleagues to make sure we make the absolute most of those. And so some of our investment, we talk about where some of our money goes, Councillor Robinson, so it goes back into doing work on things like this as well to make sure we can unlock power. So we spent a chunk of money this year, for instance, in making sure that we can get connectivity both to UTS, but to open up power for this. I think it's £1.8 million of our money, for instance, has gone into creating those links. So it's a real important part of what we're about. We're a facilitator as well as a developer. But that power that we have is a real selling point for the county.
And just highlights the fact that when money does become available through our funds, it's not all about being able to settle off some of that debt, because it has to be used to progress further projects as an enabler.
It's about doing the right thing and making sure that Sarah, Maria and their teams can actually bring in developers on the back of some of the work that we've done, because we do have that land holding. So that asset base that we do have, we're trying to make the best use of, not just about houses, it's about other stuff as well. So there is some joined up thinking, or there's a lot of joined up thinking, but yeah, we need to make the most of those assets we do have collectively.
Okay. So I'm keen to move things on. I just want to pick up on a few things. So I was really interested to see the gap that was widening between the asset value and the debt, and how that was growing. And because I know there's been a few comments made to say, well, the debt's still there, sort of thing, but it is actually growing the value of the assets. Pick up as well when you mentioned about the cash in the bank. Yes, the interest, that changes with the payments, etc. But over the years, there's been many large companies who've literally gone to the wall because they've been very asset rich but have no cash in the bank. And as long as we've got cash in the bank, that still keeps a going concern. Obviously, picking up on the Cramlington thing and on Manor Walks, it's good to see some positive moves. Myself and some of my colleagues have had involvement in discussions around traffic congestion and the regeneration. Manor Walks is well managed, and there's been numerous shopping centres throughout the country that have gone to the wall because they haven't been well managed. They've either closed down, demolished, and I'm aware that Manor Walks has had an increase in footfall, which is what the trend of many throughout the country, etc. So it was a very clear decision. We must run check when that was purchased, but it's not the right decision to have it in public ownership. So taking steps to improve on that, both for the public and turn things around. And the sensible options that go forward are much better than the £30 million plus designs that have been brought forward a number of years ago with huge TV screens across the front concourse, things like that, which were just a little bit too far. So I'm pleased to see that and some of the plans out there. But just want to take this opportunity to thank yourself, Stephen, and your team for coming along and bringing this information to the committee. I look forward to you coming back in the future. And thank you for the committee. You don't have to hang on for the next item. Thank you very much. Malcolm.
Chair, before you move on, can I take the opportunity to ask Councillor Weymouth and Councillor Lover, given you've got my spidey senses twitching here about this reorganisation, given what you've said, lots of conditions have changed. Officers want to look at it. might not be the right time. All of us are going to bring back full council.
Not necessarily to the council because the decision's been made, councillor Robinson.
The decision was made on the information that was available at the time. What you're saying is there's new information available.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying.
You seem to be saying that.
Let me be really clear what I'm saying, which is that if the conditions exist in terms of the financial envelope that was identified at full council, that's the decision that was made. You've given permission in the budget and in that vote for a particular set of circumstances. Yes, particularly the financial circumstances around the refinancing.
We've also promised that we have a full council presentation on it, which we never had. At the time, we're not going through at the time.
I have to check the minutes of the meeting to double check that because I don't recall that, but we sit in a lot of meetings and I don't remember everything. I will use my senses to detect that you may not be.
It's just my superpower.
It's your superpower. We'll.
Thank you, yes. I would just like to ask Mr Harrison if we could arrange a meeting because I know your unit alignment there, something that I have not been advised of or consulted on any sort of way. I know I was going to get sent a report at the full council that Councillor Sanderson mentioned something about it and I haven't had that back yet either, so we're going that long.
Through you, Chair,
But if
again.
it's something that involves Linemouth, I would like to meet up and actually find out what it is, please.
Well, so hang on, Chair. I don't think Advance are involved in that discussion unless you tell me otherwise. We get bits and pieces of market intelligence all the time, Councillor Dunn. I think that was Councillor Jackson that sparked that one, so I assume that was something that was anecdotally said to him.
So where do I get this market information from them, seeing this is my vote?
When there's something pertinent, we haven't had anything from anybody to say anything in particular, unless I'll correct myself if the plan of the thousand. But I get, we get gossip from all the county all the time, but I've not seen anything that I would say I would be a local member to and saying here's something happening because it's not.
Just to clarify, councillor, there wasn't a particular project in Linemouth. I was just aware that it is your constituency, and you have grid connected. You have a grid connection there, which makes it of interest. We at Northumberland don't have any live inquiries in Linemouth. I'm sorry to say we don't. More than happy to have a chat with you and talk about anything up there.
Well, we'll put something in the diary for that.
Part of the
Great.
very much, everyone.
Not going to wait. No, I wasn't expecting it.
But we'll just say thank you for that, or do we make a recommendation? Or are you going to ask if there's any recommendation? Thank you.
So item 6 is the Northumberland Economic Strategy and Investment Framework. Councillor Weymouth.
Excellent. You've got a bit more of me. So for this report, first of all, I did just want to include some context as to how we got here, but because we've got new members and there's quite a bit of history in relation to where this funding comes from. So back in 2018 or so, there was an old cold storage yard at Camas. It was owned by RWE Npower. And I asked that some discussions were struck up between the council and RWE to acquire that site, and there was £4 million or so put in the capital programme potentially to purchase that site. In around about 2020, British Volt popped up and they were heavily backed by various government departments to deliver a indigenous UK solution to automotive electrification, production of batteries, etc. And they spent a number of hundreds of thousands, if not a few £1 million, studying the site of contamination, etc., etc. After due diligence of the British Volt and at various scrutiny meetings and so on, we purchased the land and in a heartbeat sold it to British Volt. In that heartbeat or so that we owned it, we, my request and the recommendation of Michael Black, who's head of commercial Investment at Advanced Northumberland at the time added a series of covenants and clauses, meaning that if that Britishvolt project did not proceed in the timeline that they had given us, which was very strict, then the council could buy that land back for the money that we spent, and that we would be the beneficiaries of all of the information that they had gathered in the meantime in terms of those studies. This is not, and that's important. I just want people to understand, that our team, and in particular the property and estates team, constantly doing this stuff where we've got one that particularly bad for this stuff on 999 meters per pound, and people in buildings in the end of the 95 dollars and know some of what I'm talking about. So this is council learning the lesson of some bad habits that had gone on before it. During the time that Britishvolt were on site, they spent again a lot more money on the site, some site levelling, clearance, and a whole host of other stuff. We lobbied successfully with them to have the land included in an investment zone, which I'll explain a little bit in a moment. I think it was the middle of 2022, was it? There was, or 2023, I can't recall. There was a change in economic circumstances. Britishvolt struggled, had grown, I think, to be fair, too fast, and was too financially exposed to withstand that. They went into administration, and a company called Recharge surfaced, wanting to do roughly the same thing, build batteries on the site. At that point, we looked at taking the land back into our ownership. Britishvolt had added additional land holding and various other things, such that the full land envelope by that was probably about 10 to 12 million pounds that would have cost us to bring back in-house. At that time, 2024, we had Blackstone QTS, which is this large hyperscale data center that you're all familiar with, come to the fore. They obviously would have less employment on site, and it was, in that sense, at least, a different type of attractiveness for us. Notwithstanding the points regarding improved electricity grid, which would come with that project, and huge investment of 20 to 30 billion, depending on who ends up on the site. So to that end, in order to release our buyback clause, we had a very back and forth as to how much money we wanted for the county to release that right, led by the leader, myself and Simon Nielsen, but as well including Sarah and others. And the final offer was 110 million pounds to release just our buyback rights. We didn't own it, it was just the buyback rights that we released. And there would also be money spent by the company on biodiversity offsetting through NCC Advanced Northumberland land. In addition, a bit that we talked about in full council and other things, and it is relevant. I'm sorry it's going on a bit. There's 15 million by the time all of this is built out, which comes to the county and the mayor in terms of business rates, one after the other. That is as a result of the investment zone that was put in place. Otherwise, we would be sharing that money with national government. I just want, in this long preamble, really just to stress, this isn't Section 106 money or anything else. This is money that the council has secured through leveraging its position. The decision was made subsequently and in consultation to ring fence this money for economic works because that's a sensible thing to do, but also because it mitigated for the fewer jobs that we were going to see on site. And effectively, that has created this position that you see in front of you, which Sarah is going to talk to you about in a moment. The themes you'll see in here, it's about having a recycling fund to help business growth, because we know that we've got a number of businesses in Northumberland that struggle with access to finance, and also we've faced loss of shared prosperity funding and so on in the latest round of government, I don't know how we want to describe it, allocation of funds, just to be nice. We've got in here an urgent need for site acquisition. So you've heard a little bit about how we've seen the development of this site by QTS. We know that West Hertford is in the process of being developed. There may be, who knows, stuff that comes forward on line mouth, and if that's the case, then we would have lost a huge amount of employment land and should make sure that we're doing right by the residents, by council, by business. And then finally, so that we need to make potentially strategic interventions in terms of acquisition of land and of investment in infrastructure. And then finally, I think in terms of funds, we've got an issue with commercial property. On occasion, we have companies that grow, which is what we want them to do, but they outgrow their premises, and there isn't always premises in Northumberland, and they end up in North Tyneside, in Dean Valley or Sunderland or wherever. We want to be able to invest in property to stop that, but also to allow new businesses to start up. And that means creating a platform for them and some smaller units and refurbishing of existing units as well. And that in itself, you might be thinking, why does the council need to do that? Well, unfortunately, for those of you who have experience in this, you might have seen it already. When you build one of these buildings, a commercial unit in Northumberland at the moment, unfortunately, the minute that you open it, it isn't worth the same as it costs to build it. And so that is a fundamental problem. If it was the case in Team Valley or in central London or wherever, that doesn't happen. But it means that there's not a whole host of people who rush in to provide that commercial property space. So we can't give it to the market, unfortunately. And with that, I'm sure and Sarah can give a little bit of a chat alongside Maria on some more of the detail.
But a few slides, councillors, these are you'll circulate them after the meeting. They're essentially the same information that have been in the cabinet report. This is the third cabinet report on the Northumberland Growth Fund that really just pulls out the key messages from all of those cabinet reports. So there's quite a lot of information as we've developed the fund. So going on to the first slide, I won't go into this a lot of detail here. Richard's covered a lot of the background in terms of where the Northumberland Growth Fund came from the deal with Blackstone QTS to create this fund. We have, as I mentioned, kind of set out in that April 2024 cabinet report was the initial statement where cabinet agreed that there would be a focus absolutely on jobs involved in that fund. And then since then, there's been kind of development work to develop what we know is a really important fund for the county. There aren't many local authorities that are in the position to have this level of funding to support economic aim. So we'll move on to the next slide, please. As part of that work, then we've developed what we the guiding principles of an investment framework to kind of steer that the development and the investment of the Growth Fund. It was previously known as the Growth and Investment Endowment Fund, or GIF. We simplified that to the Northumberland Growth Fund. So if you see reference to the Investment Endowment Fund, it is the same money. It's the 110 million, up to 110, which will come from the deal with Blackstone QTS. So in June 24, that was we set out first of the kind of starting to develop that investment framework, what that would look at. Ring fence for those sorts of activities that are there on the left-hand side of the slide. So economic activity, improved productivity and wage levels, jobs, increase in business competitiveness and productivity. Importantly, investing in placemaking connectivity where that leads to economic activity. Some of that is linked with land that we've touched on, and we'll come on to that in a bit more detail. And also importantly, unlocking partnerships between the public and private sector where we can use this funding to leverage in wider funding. And so those principles around benefit and additionality were really important. This is in addition, we don't want this funding to displace funding that would otherwise have come into the county. It's to add value to that. Value for money and deliverability. So again, looking at commercially sound and deliverable projects. And what we can do with that is look at, because this is in our gift as a county council, look at the social value and the inclusive growth as part of those projects as well, which may not be looked at through other funding that comes through the county.
And then, as I mentioned, crowding in private sector leverage, private sector funding rather than leveraging that, as well as the public sector funding from government, from the combined authority, where we know match funding is often important for leveraging investment. We developed, thanks Luke, I won't go through this because you can't read those words. It was in this within the June Cabinet Report 2024, so it's publicly available. It's essentially the logic model that gets us to what do we think about in terms of inputs, what do we want to get out of these funds, so we can see that all of the things that would have that are assets for the county, but also the areas that we want to invest more in and make improvements into, kind of flow through this logic model to their outcomes and outputs, and then the impact we want to see from the fund. So it's an important diagram, I suppose, to show what we intend to be able to deliver from the growth fund. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as a result of moving on from that agreement, agreeing that that's what we look at as the investment fund, we did more work to really kind of focus down on what or do we want this funding to look at supporting, deliver those outcomes and that impact. And November 24 Cabinet considered, as Richard said, kind of two key areas where investment is critical in terms of moving forward economic development jobs in the county, land site and infrastructure, particularly in the context of what Richard said there in terms of moving towards having a lot of our key employment sites being developed, which is great, which is very positive, but actually we want to have a pipeline of areas and sites where we can attract new investment to. That is often the role of local authorities or public sector to risk those sites to be able to attract investment to them. That was an area that we wanted to look at. And then also strategic economic development and regeneration, looking at investment directly into businesses, where businesses might not be able to attract investment from other funds or other areas. And also that point about the commercial property that you touched on, and in fact, that touched on very important for that in the county. The county creating jobs, but also growing and being able to stay in the county. It's important to say that what we did when we did the modelling of how we would potentially invest the money, we looked at that in terms of what the potential outcomes of that would be. So if we invested in money as we set out as in small areas, that could get the county up to 5,500 jobs. That investment, it would add nearly 900 million GVA into our economy in the county. And for every £1 we invest of the growth fund, it would generate over £7 in GVA as well. So that's how we looked at that. We want to see what that impact would be as we developed the model. And we then, taking that as a framework, as agreed by Cabinet, commissioned more work to look in more detail as to how we would develop of what those individual strands of work would look like and how they would be mobilised. At which point I'll hand over to Maria.
Yeah. Hi everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Head of Economic Development in Sarah's team. You can go to the next slide, please. So as Sarah has explained, the report in November 2024 sort of set out some of the sort of broad activities, and we used those and a few assumptions on how you would proportion money against those assumptions. By far, investing in land and infrastructure, because that then enables follow-on economic activity to return sort of a bigger impact. But what we wanted to do is sort of develop that further. So the next few slides I'm going to take you through sort of describes a body of work that we've done to alongside the economic strategy, which obviously was in the same report. We were in a very lucky position to be able to bring things together at the same time. I'll cover a little bit on the economic strategy in terms of how it relates to Northumberland Growth Fund. But over the last sort of year and a bit, we've done some very detailed work, both through the economic strategy, all the evidence that we have from the economic strategy, key sectors that we want to support, key interventions and priorities. And you'll see through the economic strategy that we have pulled out investment as a particular opportunity, because we are in a unique position as a local authority, of one of few unique positions of being able to shape the narrative around Northumberland more broadly, not just for the local authority in terms of what can be enabled and supported, but also potentially having those leaders behind and to support the development. So what we did with Grant Thornton, a comprehensive bit of work to understand some of the background. So we did market analysis in terms of the gaps in the market. One of the key principles that was agreed in November 2024 that we needed to investigate further is if you think of the Northumberland Growth Fund, amplifying the money that is available, if a proportion of it was investment in sites and premises, and a proportion was a recoverable component in terms of being able to put money out for businesses to be able to access, that sits alongside other funds, that bit's recoverable. So therefore it gives some longevity to that money for it to be reinvested over and over again. We needed to sort of test that with the market to understand a couple of things in terms of what the gap in the market is. We don't want to displace any funding. We don't want to displace them by authority funding or government or investments with British business plans. But what we want to do is attract that kind of investment into Northumberland alongside be able to add value and additional investment. But also we wanted to test different options, because obviously there are options, broader options open to the local authorities. Fund, we could be buying into a regional fund, we could be setting our own fund. So needed to test all of those sort of options. So the body of work that we did with Grant Thornton and through the economic strategy did comprehensive market analysis to understand where the gaps are and what the market is telling us in terms of how we can support development in Northumberland. Did work on fund structure design and a number of options, which I'll take you through in a minute. Different operating models, how governance would work. So within the county council governance and the insurance framework that we have agreed with government for some of the big sort of investments that we manage through direct investment through government, how could it work with that? We also created a prioritisation framework. So the way that we would assess projects, whether that was direct investment or whether that was investment through a recoverable component, how would we be able to monitor performance? So the whole package of tools that we would be able to use to mobilise. So that gave us a fully evidence and a model that we could build on to be able to mobilise. Next slide, please. So the market assessment, so between the economic strategy and the market assessment that we did with Grant Thornton and Sanderson Weatherall, sort of gave us sort of clear indication of where the gaps in the market are. Definitely there are finance gaps, so there is a gap there that we can fill. So they've evidenced that and how that could work alongside regional funds. How, as Richard mentioned, unlocking modern employment space is something that came out very clearly through both bits of work, both for the economic strategy and this market assessment. How we can support our key sectors, both in the foundational economy, but some of the high growth sectors are linked to the government's industrial strategy and the North East Local Growth Plan. How we can crowd in private investment, so that goes back to some of the core principles. How do we use the money that we've got to create a much bigger pot of investment into Northumberland? How we can operate with credibility. This is important, especially in terms of recoverable components. It needs to have credibility in the market that sits alongside other market tools. And there was a lot of conversations that we asked Grant Thornton to do with different funds, so the National Wealth Fund, Crown Estates, different funds that operate at a national, regional scale, Legal and General, for example, and trying to sort of compress all of that in terms of insights at those different levels Very strong appetite for co-investment. Northumberland is really building momentum because of the kind of things, the investments that have been happening over the last few years, and definitely see the opportunity of where we can be contributing to both regional and national growth. Concluded on the same sort of gaps in terms of where there might be an opportunity to be investing, where the demand for patient capital. Patient capital means where you can take a bit of a longer view rather than having to exit earlier. How we, the opportunities in the place in Northumberland, which are very clear, and what the particular focus are in terms of the options of where recoverable component. Next slide, please. So all of that's come together. So in the cabinet report, you would have seen the second appendix. The first appendix was a very small writing on the economic strategy. Apologies for that. We do have some printed copies for you to look at the economic strategy. So I've printed it on your documents. It was, as the chair said, rather small. But the second appendix was the summary of the work that Grant Thornton did. So that all together sort of helps us create a bit of an investment framework, as does the economic strategy, is very clear in terms of where, as we've picked out a specific one of the four sort of themes of the economic strategy is investment, and investment runs through all of the other three priorities as well in terms of enterprise, place and people. And we have a very clear sort of rationale for investment. Northumberland's at a defining economic moment, real opportunity as the economic strategy outlines. We've articulated that in terms of what that growth might look like, in terms of, so we did independent modelling, so what could the overall jobs potential look like, and how can we respond to that? So the strategy, as Sarah said earlier, and Richard mentioned, is very specific on Northumberland. We very specifically took a capability approach. So how do we create a 10-year framework for all partners across Northumberland to be able to deliver against the priorities? So it creates a very clear way where we can be driving investment, and we have that opportunity to both do that with the levers that we've got as a local authority, but also convening partners to do that. And that is very clearly where the Northumberland Growth Fund sits. It sits as a tool to deliver against the economic strategy. And again, in terms of strengths and barriers, very resilient businesses that we've got in Northumberland, strong sector clusters, a very deep skills base and high reinvestment by firms. We did a deep dive on the kind of private sector investment that is our businesses are investing in. So again, it creates an opportunity to be co-investing. And then in terms of barriers, as Richard mentioned, lack of development ready sites, shortage of modern premises, weak equity growth finance ecosystem, so the ability to sort of add to that. And then there are connectivity and that concerns which we could be investing. Next slide, please. So when I mentioned in the previous slide, the work that we did with Grant Thornton very clearly went through a few options. So we could go through and assess what the different options are. And as you can see, you go from national funds to regional funds and creating an in-house fund, and that could look in different ways. We looked at it from a strategic fit position, financial return position, risk and governance, reputational impact, and speed to mobilise. And obviously having to balance where we appreciate sort of members will want to have a level of influence over how, and if we think about the that reinvestable component, will want the impact to be felt in the government. So addressing sort of those potential components which link back to the principles that were agreed in June 24, sort of it is clear that in terms of strategic fit with the economic strategy and our priorities, the financial return position, the risk and governance and the reputational impact, having a fund that is managed within Northumberland, but then links very closely with regional and national funds, is a clearer opportunity for the longer term. It is obviously a little bit longer to set up, but that is the sort of the amber component. So working through those models, sort of concluding that creating a recoverable component that's managed for Northumberland is the option that we should be progressing. Next slide, please. Just a couple of slides left. So as we mentioned, sort of moving through all of that work that we've done over this last year and a half, if we think of the Northumberland Growth Fund as the money, there are three main ways that the funding can be deployed. It can be directly invested, mainly around site acquisition, site enablement, supporting with investment. We were clear that we could be doing some of the things quickly through a grant process. So again, through commercial property incentive, potentially to draw additional regional funding into the pipeline that exists in Northumberland but is stalled, or any other commercial property components. Grants for projects that support jobs and economic infrastructure. And then there is the recoverable component, which would be a procured fund manager. So as Sarah outlined before, in November, Cabinet agreed to mobilise those sort of two main programmes, three complementary strands of activity, and informed by all of the work that we've done with Grant Thornton and through the economic strategy. What was proposed in the Cabinet paper that just went to Cabinet in March was two main programmes: an economic infrastructure programme, which would be a phased early stage investment programme delivered directly by the local authority. So this would be any direct investments or sort of grants to particular projects that would work through the existing local assurance framework. And then a Business Northumberland Investment Fund, which will be the recoverable component, loans and equity, that would be directed towards businesses in Northumberland and would sit alongside other regional funds, ensuring there is no displacement. So next slide, please. So the next couple of slides just sort of detail the what is in the Cabinet paper in terms of how we could set up these two programmes. Out of the money that we were expecting to flow through out of that 100 up to 110 million, we have received 18.25 million from Blackstone, because those were those payments were linked to the early sort of milestones for the planning permission. And then subsequent sort of income will be, as each building is completed, then there will be an income that comes in. So it's phased over a period of time, which we expect to be around 7 years. Vertical construction on the site will start later this summer on the first two buildings, and they are building two at a time. So the economic infrastructure programme is that early investment that can be mobilised as a programme to unlock sites, premises and infrastructure that will enable investment in Northumberland and creating high quality sustainable employment opportunities, working through employment line, commercial floor space, and the infrastructure line to key sector opportunities. So the kinds of things that we can bring forward that support the creation of jobs. We can address clearly infrastructure site constraints where demonstrable market failure exists, and demonstrate a high degree of deliverability. So how do we sort of bring things forward quickly? And this would be operated through existing council governance and the local assurance framework. So it would be fully transparent. It would be sort of open. There would be programmes that we could open for projects, etc., or things that we could bring forward in terms of employment sites that are in council control that we could bring forward for investing to create more jobs. So this is our whole, this is and that's why it's called economic infrastructure. How do we bring those key things forward that support more jobs to progress? Next slide, please. And the next thing, the other component that was in the Cabinet report is how do we set up the Business Northumberland Investment Fund? I think before I start on this slide, very clearly to say that we've been working very closely with the North East Fund. So this is the regional fund that has existed over many years, that has been capitalised previously with European funding like Jeremy Fund. Most recently, you might have seen that the Combined Authority has put investment into the North East Fund to continue that capitalisation. And that regional fund has been created and is still there operational with money that has been recycled over all of those years of public funding. And again, the North East Fund is focusing on some of the business investment, and they've got fund managers that are operational, but we were very keen to work closely with them in order for, well, A, advice, and B, to ensure anything that we set up in Northumberland is very clearly aligned and not displacing any of that regional investment. In a similar way, the North West Fund worked with Durham County Council, for example, when they capitalised a £20 million fund a few years ago. They worked with Sunderland that did similar. So, you know, there are a lot of examples in the region where there is that complementarity between some local interventions that are supporting businesses, but also the regional sort of infrastructure that exists and how they work together. So, on the basis of that advice and getting a fund manager that could be embedded in the work that we do more broadly around business support and inward investment, there was a suggestion that being able to if we do go to, or as we progress to procurement, making it a component that is enviable to the market, that the fund manager would want to get involved. Hence, there's a 10 million out of that 18.25 that has been agreed, with the break clause of additional 10 million that could be put into that fund once that the buildings are complete and we get the next payment in. But it would be managed in that way, in that there would be a way to sort of break it off, but it illustrates the opportunity. And for both of these programmes, it gives us a way through which, as the money comes in and the development progresses, Cabinet will have a way to, you know, deploy that funding through those components, but that would have to go back to Cabinet at that point in time. So I'll not repeat a lot of what I said. There's a lot of evidence that came through the market assessment that we did in terms of very clearly how this would work. We've done a lot of detailed work with the market as well to sort of understand how a Business Northumberland Investment Fund would work. But basically, this would put investment in place for Northumberland businesses, and within the context that more broadly, as you're aware, you know, we've got a Northumberland Small Business Service and we've managed regional programmes before. There's a broad move away from government on grants for businesses. So there is a need to be creating a framework through which we're supporting businesses to access finance and different models, because there isn't going to be the kind of grant investment that has been in the past. So this gives us an ability to be able to support businesses and enable them to think about access to finance. Next slide, please. I've mentioned this a few times as well in terms, as I've gone through, in terms of the governance. So this summarises it in this slide in terms of any council-led investment would go through the local assurance framework, you know, in working through pipeline, business case appraisal, approval, monitoring, the usual ways that we manage investment and grants as we do currently. Officer and Cabinet decision making as normal, and there is a fully auditable way to sort of manage that and again bring updates back to Cabinet and of course to scrutiny as appropriate. The recoverable investment would be structured as a limited partnership or a limited liability partnership. We've got very clear indication from the market in terms of that ability for a fund to be managed in that way. And to be fair, all of the funds, well, nationally and in the region, and the local ones such as Durham and Sunderland are set up as limited partnerships or limited liability partnerships. That gives the ability to bring in additional investors, but also gives that idea that a regulated FCA fund manager is managing that fund and making the appropriate decisions. But very importantly, all of that work that I discussed that we did through Grant Thornton in terms of prioritisation and how everything links with the economic strategy, that creates a very clear Northumberland set of, if we describe it as guardrails. So the way that investment can be made and the investment strategy is agreed by the local authority, but it is mobilised by an FCA regulated fund manager. And that is very typical in terms of these kinds of funds across. But obviously, with all of that comes performance management, accountability, and a whole set of structures that are detailed in the Cabinet report, which I won't bore you with now, that very clearly have to manage performance, understand how a fund is, and the broader sort of concept of how we directly invest, deploy grants or indeed have a recoverable component, how all of that is performing against the priorities that we've set in the economic strategy and the indicators in terms of are they doing the right things, whilst building in the flexibility to be able to adapt to things that happen. As we know, the world is not very static these days, and there has to be a need to be able to adapt to local circumstances. And then the last slide, I'll talk to you for a bit. This sort of describes the milestones that we could be working through and the sort of anticipated time it would take to operationalise the Northumberland Growth Fund. And again, talking about the Growth Fund as the money with 2 programmes. The Economic Infrastructure Programme can be mobilised faster because this is, you know, the in terms of direct investment into sites and infrastructure, enabling sites to come forward, any grant investment into particular projects, we can mobilise that through existing infrastructure. The recoverable component would take some time to go through a full procurement process to bring a funds manager in place. So it needs to be sort of managed in that sort of way. So again, this gives an indication of the kind of milestones that we could progress moving forward. So we're happy to answer questions. Apologies, I know we've thrown a lot to you, but I think you can see that there's been a lot of work to sort of evidence the approach, and there's been a lot of discussion through Cabinet over the last maybe 2 years now, going back to April 24.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Sarah. So members, questions, comments? Councillor Dunn.
Comment rather than question. Thank you, Maria, for gathering me through that. Sorry. I know, no, a lot of information in there, but really, I mean, this is a really big investment for Northumberland. It's vital importance. And I've got to say that I think members were a bit perturbed that it hadn't come to scrutiny beforehand. I know we're post-scrutiny, but something this big, of such importance, could this not have come pre-scrutiny so we could have looked at this before it actually went to Cabinet? I mean, it's come here now. I think I sent an email to the chair and a couple of weeks ago asking for it, but it was actually a call-in that brought it here, or the threat of a call-in, shall we say. So I just think we feel that we're not in that process of looking at it, that there was a lack of cross-party input on it.
So I assume that's a more question to politicians, councillor, and just to be, we're very happy.
Kind of got it in mind though. The one question I did have with this was a lot of the report is linked to inequalities and tackling inequalities. How are we going to monitor that, and how can we ensure that these grants, this work, this improvement doesn't go to better off areas who have shovel-ready schemes, shall we say? How are we going to ensure that the more deprived areas benefit from this fund?
And I think this is a component about thinking about the Northumberland Growth Fund as part of the bigger approach of the economic strategy and what we're doing. So if we take a particular example of thinking about a project that comes forward is creating jobs. How are those jobs then linked to our residents that need support to access jobs? How do we think about the social value out of that project? So it's not just about the specific project and the money for that specific project, but it's thinking it in that more holistic way of how we spread the impact. So if we take the QTS example as and I know this isn't necessarily an example for the Northumberland Growth Fund, but it is an example of a big investment in Northumberland. I've worked very closely with QTS around social value. We have set up from the very start a task force, but now we have a social value group. We've got the VCSE attends that, as does the college, as do local schools, as does DWP, as does the Combined Authority, and I've probably missed someone off there. But working very clearly through how do we support our residents from that radius around that investment into the jobs, have worked very closely with QTS on how we manage that demand for jobs, but also how do we support with training. So working very closely with Northumberland Skills and the college. But that's just one example, and we want to replicate that all the way through. And the economic strategy does give us that broader framework on how we can be investing.
Yeah, I think the to add to that as well, we've talked about in terms of the economic strategy being able to report back on that councillor, so we understand it is absolutely kind of what we do around those individual projects, around the skills and training we engage in those projects. We'll know if that's working through the continued monitoring. So it's linked to the economic strategy, there will be the development of KPIs, and we'll be able to bring that back. So we'll know where those investments are kind of making a difference or not, and we adapt our approach accordingly.
And those same KPIs are the KPIs we would use to monitor how the Northumberland Growth Fund is progressing, and is it hitting those targets. If not, then I have to take consideration of something that needs to change. But hence why we are creating that framework of being able to monitor things properly.
And so we have, and just on the question of scrutiny on months. Ultimately, so you get the forward plan. Highlight anything to the chair that you want to bring to scrutiny. We'll bring it to scrutiny. We don't want, the guidance from peer reviews and all sorts of things that have gone is not to do pre-scrutiny on everything. I think that we've got an arrangement that, from my perspective, that works well. What I would say is that this document and everything around it went to group leaders. There's a discussion with group leaders. Simon Nielsen, I think, presented to that group and talked through it. So there's an opportunity there from political group perspectives or non-political groups, however it is, to think of something. You've got the ability, as you have done, to say that you wanted to come here. We're here and happy to talk, and just so that you understand. So yes, it has been to Cabinet, but also I think if you look at the Cabinet agenda on the 7th of April, it goes back to Cabinet as well, just to with any clarification points that might arise from this discussion as well.
Councillor Nichols.
Yeah, on page 57, there's a little chart outlining the governance of the General Council's role, and it's showing the general partner, the fund manager, is online with the limited partner, which would be the council, and the little page shows it's the council body. Is it the council body or is it the Cabinet that's in that governance?
So for a limited liability partnership, the limited partner is the public sector partner that buys into the fund, and that limits the liability to the local authority. The decisions are made by the fund manager, who acts as the general partner, and I'll have an independent investment committee, but using the details of the investment strategy that the local authority agrees, that goes through Cabinet. So as I said, the guardrails for the investment are agreed through Cabinet. The implementation of it is through the investment committee of either a limited partnership or limited liability partnership. We're working with our legal colleagues just to sort of define some small differences between either one in terms of pros and cons, but they are of the same class of governance models. So and then the performance monitoring is via the local authority, and would be reported back to Cabinet at regular intervals, and indeed all being scrutiny.
So from what I understand, it's not, the limited partner is not the council as the full membership. It's the decisions are made between the Cabinet and the decisions are made by the fund manager, but the Cabinet is the strategic side of that thing. So then my next question is how would the full council membership be involved in that, in your view, if this was all go forward?
So the administration is there to administer things on behalf of full council. And the main things to scrutiny, where you want to see things scrutiny, I think that was effectively said, we'll bring updates on this. I don't know what, how theoretically you want to go, how much you want to put. That would be the way that you would do it. The cabinet's not going to be sat there saying invest in, I'm understanding,
Wait,
invest in business A, B,
can't
C.
thoroughly-
Because that's the job as fund manager. We're there ultimately, and we're all here ultimately to make sure that fund managers doing the job that we have prescribed and to our satisfaction. And if not, then there would have to be some form of recourse or intervention.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Is that fair? Does that answer the question? Hopefully so.
It sort of answers the question, but I'm still not sort of clear where our involvement would be. Would it always be after the horse is fallen, or would it be if there was something that cropped up that, oh, this is rather quite important, would then it come back to scrutiny for full involvement before a decision was made?
So do this. I don't think that you're talking about, invest about buying X big bit of land or so that this is interventions into businesses in order to help them grow. And you wouldn't expect us to say, we've got a cafe in central line that's for hundreds of thousands of pounds. What do you think of that? Is that a good idea? Yeah, I know you wouldn't expect us to get that level of detail. So the important thing is that you describe rightly now what it is that you want them to do, or else, that'll probably be the next bit of this work, to be fair, is this is the parameters that you're working at. So what I might suggest is that you have a bit of a look at that and see if you satisfy that with that once it's evolved. And that we'll bring that back here so you can see it. That would be the time for you to influence rather than affect.
That's right, the cabinet and the wider structure that will have to make a decision, set that strategic direction for the fund as it deals with everything. And then the fund manager would be the long way going to be managed in that sense. So that, as Richard said, it wouldn't be individual investments that cabinet would get involved in. That would be fund manager that sets the direction, and that's where normal processes like scrutiny discussions would play a part.
And if it gives you something to do, and that's what happens already with RAMP, with share prosperity funds and so on and so forth. That level is a delegated level in very mutually to officers. That might come through effectively. Again, you would see that on the cabinet plan, you would see the document, and if there was a amber flag, red flag, whatever you want to describe it, you can always come in.
Sure, that is, we've got a few questions. Okay, and I've got a few questions, but just yes or no if you want. First of all, this investment in Elliot's this man I walked, isn't it? Then we're going down the same sort of track, but never mind, who did the assessment? Grant Thornton, obviously. Who's on the NCC programme board?
Yeah, so Simon.
So the executive director chairs that board, that the local security framework, which we'll use against it, it's been agreed to a supplement. We use that framework and process for all of our devolved funds for the county council to weigh that we can have a process whereby business cases are developed in the phrase property green book, and it goes through a decision-making process that has already been agreed by cabinet. So where there's been an agreement and strategic direction set, programme board can operationalise that. So that's chaired by Simon Nielsen, and it's got cross organisation representation in there.
Why an external fund manager and no access to the hiring and firing?
So that's procured. So the external fund manager, as in you bring a fund manager company in, that is, will go through procurement. So that would be a completely open procurement process to bring a fund manager in.
Now, why an external fund manager?
Oh, so that came very strongly through the market assessment into, well, you need an FCA regulated fund manager, or that is good practice in terms of managing a fund and equity. The response that came from all of the different stakeholders that we talked about, National Wealth Fund, Crown Estates, British Business Bank, all of those, as well as sort of fund managers that sort of exist, and other stakeholders, that independence and that regulated environment through which to make loans and equity is managed typically through a fund manager, because that gives an independence from a sort of a process point of view, and following FCA rules in terms of how you do loan.
Hires and fires.
Hires and fires, the company, or hires and fires
My next question
personnel?
is why a limited partnership, and possibly some of what you just said, why a limited partnership, but I don't know who hires and fires, who's gonna,
You guys advise the organisation that's administering.
yeah.
Yeah, the council.
We do, that's
Yeah.
fine, that's fine, you see. I was gonna ask you about benchmarking levels, but I think you've answered the KPI thing. What is the foundation economy? Is it the basic economic infrastructure to enable private sector development?
The foundational economy is one of the key, is a way to describe sectors in terms of the components of our everyday economy. Now, what we've done through the economic strategy is being very specific in terms of the foundational economy of the key sectors that are particularly important for Northumberland and have potential to grow. So within the foundational economy as a sector, because obviously it is quite broad, and that is the majority of jobs are in the foundational economy, covers the visitor economy, it covers land-based industries, it covers food and drink, it covers constructions, it covers high street retail and social care. As big employers in Northumberland, and that have the potential to grow. And then the other 4 key sectors that we've identified through the economic strategy, again linked through to the North East Local Growth Plan and the industrial strategy, 8 key sectors that they've identified. We've got 4 that are particularly important in Northumberland, and that's offshore wind, data and AI, advanced manufacturing, and life sciences in terms of pharmaceutical manufacturing.
Through you, Chair, just to say, if economic strategy, Malcolm, pages 43 through to 48, there's the full detail on.
It describes it in more detail.
And this 42% in the next 10 years. We really need to see the analysis and scenario planning, because the only way the claims made can be realised is if we understand and follow the same path. You understand that?
Sorry, say that again.
You know this, we've said
The potential for growth.
could grow by 42% over the next 10 years. We need to see that analysis. We need to see. Is that what you're saying?
It's in there.
It's in the economic strategy.
It's a really detailed, good document. I appreciate if you've got questions, ask.
And we've got KPIs involved in that.
Yes, it's detailed in the
It's
economic
very,
strategy.
very detailed.
Now, when we talk about workspace and whatnot, isn't that the advanced space? And are we going to be in competition with our own 100% owned company on that sort of?
Yeah, so there's definitely a rule for advanced that, but what we wouldn't be doing that as a county council. We would be putting investment into commercial entities could come in and create that commercial property for us. Advanced might be one of those if they want to do that, but it wouldn't be the council kind of creating workspace. It would be us facilitating that happening across the county with some investment.
And hopefully leverage another investment, Malcolm,
Yeah,
because that's
right.
the key bit. Is that we won't spend our own money unless we have to.
Establishment of a new fund supported by an intelligent client function within the council. I mean, this is just, what does this mean?
That means managing the fund appropriately and monitoring appropriately. In the main, for the Business Northumberland Investment Fund, that means linking it into our business support framework. So as you're aware, we deliver business support and we account manage all of our big employers in the county. We need to be able to link in with the fund manager. So if we look at Durham's example specifically, they had the fund manager co-located in with the team so many days across the month, so they could be sharing intelligence about the businesses that are growing, what the needs are. So on one aspect, the intelligent client is about ensuring that the fund that we create in Northumberland is very much linked to the opportunities that our businesses are bringing forward, and that intelligence comes from our employer engagement, which is what our business support team do. And then the other hand of the intelligent client function is ensuring the fund manager is delivering against the KPIs that we discussed and feeding into the governance all of that information, so appropriate decisions and sort of performance management can take place.
Good, good. I'm pleased we're listening to the private sector for change. So are we to become an investment bank? Some of this stuff.
Well, no, and that is the point of setting up or bringing in a fund manager. We capitalise the fund and the fund manager manages that funding and makes those investments based on the investment strategy that the local authority agrees. So what are our priorities? What are the kinds of things we want to see? How investment is spread across the county? All of those things and the metrics that have to be sort of adhered to and sort of reported against. So we don't become the bank. That is the purpose of bringing in a fund manager. We offer the capital for the fund manager to be invested. And then that funding, once loan payments or equity comes back, then it creates that recoverable pot. So if we take Durham's example, so obviously because Durham is a local authority similar to us and have been doing this for some years. So Durham County Council capitalised the fund with £20 million quite some years ago because they're in their second round of fund manager. Because the money keeps coming in and equities have returned sort of capital back into the fund, they've only ever drawn down 10 million out of that 20 million that is available because they keep reinvesting it. So then it creates a clean set of money that is then reinvested in our businesses.
Yeah. Further on says, under this model, the council will retain strategic influence through the setting of investment priorities, parameters, and risk tolerances, while day-to-day investment decisions will be undertaken by the fund manager. Where do we get the oversight in that? Because, and I'm particularly talking about members' oversight, but I don't particularly see a lot of members really let up on fund management.
No, and I think, Mark, that's why you wouldn't want to be really doing too much of that from members. It's for members to prescribe, because what you'll get, and I don't want to cast aspersions on members, including myself or anyone else for that matter, but what happens with members is they get pet projects, they get pet ideas and so on and so forth. What you want to do is prescribe a set of rules, identify who can qualify, how they can qualify, how business has certainty that it can engage with it in a straightforward way without any nonsense, which is exactly what will be established. What I think really is necessary then, and it's clearly going to happen, is you'll get feedback about the interventions that we've made. We might have to, I'm not preempting this, some of that might have to be in private session depending on the nature of those agreements, but it's important that you see how it's being deployed and it's being deployed successfully. Because otherwise we might want to revisit it. And as Maria said, you know, you get to the points where you reappoint the funder. It might be that you change your tack or you change your priorities, or that the world's changed and we want to invest in smart robots to go and, I don't know, do whatever they're going to do.
Well, it is a strategic direction for the council, so we need to be involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
It does sound like expensive backroom staff will be needed.
No.
No? Have we got these in place?
Yes. You have a head of economic development and you've got a business Northumberland team that is now part of the service that will manage that. So it's existing, and we have a funding and investment team as well that manage hundreds of millions of pounds through government in terms of the big programmes that we manage. So we've got the capacity within the team. It's about utilising it.
And there again, just to Malcolm, effectively the other alternatives would have been putting it to a national fund and losing the Northumberland focus. We wouldn't want to do that because we want it to impact here. But secondly, you know, if we tried to do it in-house, we would have had to do all that sort of accreditation work to make sure that we're a body that could do it, take on more staff, etc., etc. And so this feels like the sort of the most expedient way to deploy it without taking on more staff, but without making it so irrelevant to Northumberland that it's.
That's not a bad thing. Last one, then, investment pipeline refined and investment readiness actively computed until the year 26. Question is, do members get to see any of this pipeline before it's completed, and a list of either as an ongoing basis or a final set of proposals? It's and I'm talking the specifics that's in the pipeline of projects.
So what we're doing at the moment with the framework that we've got with the economic strategy, we're working across our multitude of partners to be able to draw together a pipeline of potential interventions. And again, thinking if the Northumberland Growth Fund does the money in its entirety through both programmes, the economic infrastructure and the recoverable component. So we're doing that. So absolutely, we can sort of feed that back. But the bit that we wouldn't be able to do unless it was in a private session is or we would have to anonymise it.
Yeah.
Any of the leads that we're getting through the businesses that we support, that could be, what we're trying to do is not appoint a fund manager and then expect them to build up a pipeline. We want to be doing that in parallel. So as we're supporting all of the businesses through our broader business support programme and the funding that we've got from the Combined Authority, is building up those leads that then could be passed over to the fund manager to sort of explore. Now, obviously, there are commercial components in that, but we would be able to anonymise and sort of give you an indication later in the year of what that pipeline's looking at. But wanted to give the reassurance, we are continuously building the pipeline of the things that could be utilised, and of course we can bring it back for discussion.
Yeah, tell you what I'm asking. I mean, once again, see my area being asset stripped, and we see the benefits going out across the county. I just want to make sure that for a change, we get some benefit out of this locally, and I'm talking Bedlingtonshire, because that's a major component part of our shoreline, if you like. So I'd like to see some benefits locally, as well as spreading it out across the county. And if they're all going to be judged on commercial viability or whatever you're saying, whatever you come up with, as long as that's across the board, then okay. But like I say, I'd like to see some local benefit as well.
I'll take that one, which is ultimately it depends what comes to the fore. Well,
Yeah.
and you know, it's the stuff that can be back to it'll get back subject to the rules. And we would just have to all members across the whole.
Once remember where it's come from, where this opportunities come from.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's lots more opportunity for that area. I mean, I don't want to prolong or complicate it, but you've got the data centre and you've got potential other things that might come along. Some of those ancillary industries might well effectively develop themselves. They might not need funding from us, but it might be that you want to support the supply chain, and we'll have to maybe and with your help, but with the help of the Business Northumberland team and others, work with the supply chain to identify the opportunities and then identify how it is that they could access some of this funding to grow. That's the bit really that's I think is going to be the next bit, and that's where Bedlington, Blythe, Ashington, that surrounding that cluster activity, that's where it will happen. And what I would hope is where we do have other big organisations that might come in to link with that cluster or other clusters that we've got, like the offshore energy cluster, that you might see. Section 106 might see contribution to the growth fund to increase the size of the growth fund. Talking about those data centres that are wanting to come here, if they really want to be taken seriously, they should probably be contributing to that growth fund and adding to it, because otherwise, what are they contributing? I'm not too sure how much.
Well, I'm very pleased to see an owner set for SMEs because I think that's the easiest way to help them grow, especially the 80% of interest businesses we've got. So very pleased to concentrate at least a little bit of it on SME.
Can I just say, as well, on that place, it's a really important fund for us, obviously, with the scale of it, because we've got control of it. But it's also one tool in many that, there's North East Fund, there's British Business Fund, there are other funds. So we know that landscape, Business in Northumberland know that landscape. So that pipeline will be very important, as Maria said. So we'll get a head start with the fund managers, but they also will be referred to, if that's relevant, to other areas of funding. So we're not just using the growth fund. There will be other funds that are appropriate for whatever the projects might be.
Just answer that. What we don't want is the Combined Authority or others saying, "Oh well, Northumberland's got a lot of money. It doesn't matter about them." This has to be additional, additive only, and that's how we're deployed.
Good.
Yeah, thanks.
Really, I think I'm just reiterating what Malcolm said. I think the important to me is to get some reporting mechanisms in for members, and whether that is in closed session or whatever, that's fine. But it needs to be sort of as it happens. We don't want to be finding out about it after the fact, sort of thing. And just one question about 3.6 and 3.7 of the recommendations, we're mentioning quite a lot about delegated authority. Is there a threshold to that delegated authority limit that it has to come back to cabinet or council or?
Whilst Sarah's looking for those relevant paragraphs, there will be the existing, team delegation that'll actually expect to be there in terms of officers and thresholds for money.
So, yeah, that's right. So it's the delegations that allow us to go ahead with the two things, the procurement process, which again would come back within normal delegation limits to cabinet. And then in terms of the 8.25 million, which was the infrastructure, again, similarly, it will follow normal usual procedures in terms of delegation limits. If you're going to invest any of that 8.25 million, where that invested will come back through for approval.
So we'll have to, so a bit like, let's say there's a line in the budget, X number of million, there's a paper that would come to cabinet to deploy money as long as it was in there. If it raised above 8 million or whatever and went to 9 or 10 million, that has to come back to full council because it's variation to budget. Whatever happens, you would see it in terms of the scrutiny function.
Councillor Nicholson, you have your hand again.
Yeah, I was just going back on the S106, when you said that, they could bring that back into the growth fund.
Sorry, just to make sure I'm correctly understood. 106 is 106. It's dealt with in terms of planning. I would envisage where there are companies coming here and not necessarily offering us a great deal of benefit, they have to, I would say, find somewhere contracting that. That's up to them how they do it, whether it's 106, whether it's country growth fund or happy that incentive.
Right. Because I was getting a bit confused because I thought with F106 money it couldn't go into the growth, but accountability.
Depends how you, so there's, after 106.
Donation to the growth fund, it's different. If it's S106, it has to be for a specific purpose, putting it.
Absolutely.
So just to pick up on a few things. Councillor Weymouth, you mentioned right at the start about British Falls, and I know there was a lot of previous explained about why the government wasn't clear and Melville was quite clear that they had defined milestones for it and before it released certain funding, which they failed to match that, which is why funding wasn't made available from the government, and that's why where we are at this present time. In the report, in 5.3, it mentioned the economic framework into 4 themes. That could really be an advert for Northumberland and what we're trying to achieve, those 4 bullet points there. We already know what an outstanding place Northumberland is to live in and invest in. But those 4 bullet points there really embellish on that. And we could turn that into a really good video and try and promote it a bit more.
We have some really good videos. We were subjected to it's not a slide today.
But picking up on a few more points, 7.6, 7 and 8 highlights a bit more of what's being discussed here. It's a programme of focus on early phase enabling activity that de-risks and accelerates market-led development, maximising additionality and long-term impact. That's what we're looking at getting in. It's all activity fully auditable and clear decision records and audit trails maintained throughout. So that covers a lot of the discussion as well. Transparency, accessibility, strong pipeline of high quality proposals. And opening in spring, both will invite submissions from landowners, developers, businesses and partner organisations for eligible projects that align with the programme's objectives. And be assessed through a clear and proportionate appraisal framework incorporating strategic fit, deliverability, additionality, value for money and economic impact. So we've got all of the information there really that the project is going to be looking for to take forward. But on a couple more points, and I know the actual economic strategy document itself is quite heavy reading, but significant amount of detail in there. One of the things that really worries me is a little point when it said, it's on page 80 about thriving people. Existing challenges should be acknowledged. There's a long lag between training and work readiness that constrain growth, with graduates sometimes leaving the region due to weak ties to the area and limited onward career opportunities. But it does go on to say about targeted interventions and so on and so on, and that's about linking up and how we can keep them and make it grow. So, just focusing on people staying here and letting them see that we do have the qualities and that career here, and we don't actually disappear outside the area. And again, it's getting those key messages across. But there was one that was really good, and that was in the report again. Page 88, there's a table which goes up about indicators, themes, and expected lag. Average travel time to services using public transport. Expected lag 6 years. By far the highest time on there. For 6 years, where the rest has been 2 years. 3 years. But that was 6 years. So, again, why that was the ultimately that was
the investment in infrastructure is not our, well, some of it will be delivered through us, but a lot of it will be funded by the combined authority. As you'll be aware, there was a consultation going on for a number of years about the future of the bus network. In the meantime, we do what we can. We actually have seen an increased bus usage. We've got new routes. We're talking with the Reaver and others about those routes. We are starting the next stage of the Northumberland line in terms of studies for that. We continue to lobby for more stopping trains on the East Coast Main Line, etc., etc. So we're doing where we can, but some of these, like another example, of course, whilst we're pleased to see that it's moving on to the next stages, the ultimate stage of doing anything is close to 2031. It's a long time.
Well, I can't help but wonder if that could be a significant, problem with that. Yeah, there's an announcement, and as you know, Councillor Weymouth, we've been talking about that for many, many years. To see that there's been an announcement on work wrong is welcome, but let's say down the road to 2031 is not helpful at all. When there's significant congestion build-up increases every month, and the damage it's doing to business development is significant, as well as the effect on residents that's getting to and from work, and the lack of investment on the A1 due as well. It's clearly on our economic strategy having an impact there, and I think that's with outside of our control. And exciting development as well. When this came out and came to Cabinet, I was looking on social media and some of the comments were, it's just a dream, it's pie in the sky, it'll never happen. But the amount of effort that has gone into this, as Officer said, investigation, detailed work, planning, it's really focusing on not only our special areas, but the gaps as well, and how we're going to do. It's what we need to do and can do to take Northumberland forward and go over this new investment. And I'm pleased it's come here. It needs a lot more focus and people need to understand what we're doing this, and not just skipping over it. And I'm looking forward to businesses and developers applying for this funding and to help Northumberland grow. Thank you for bringing it. Appreciate it. You can leave if you like.
That's I think
Joyce.
Going well.
Yeah.
Move on to item 7, which is the members' inquiry something. Actually, what the councillor Thank you, Chair. So, to start with some background for this, back in 2024, corporate feedback being received many complaints that inquiries from councillors were frequently left unanswered by answers responses were slow and often lacked the detail required. So in April 2025, feedback being launched an online process known now as the members inquiry system. Shortly after that, we had online elections and many experienced councillors elected back in, but many new ones too, who then used the system, which created lots of discussion and a few more new complaints about the system, including a question raised at full council in July about it, which led to this scrutiny committee deciding to have the task and finish group investigate. So, thank you very much since then to Sarah Green, head of experience, and her team, and Rebecca Greeley and Lindsay Bennett working on this with us, and to councillors Robinson, Taylor, Dunn, Jackson, and Austin for being part of this process. We've had 4 meetings. It has taken longer than I would have liked, which is frustrating. So, apologies for that, but thank you very much, everyone, for sticking with us to get to this stage. At the first meeting, we all agreed that the first protocol was to ask all councillors for their feedback on the system. So we decided on a simple survey sent to all councillors, which had a reasonably good response to it and gave some key topics to address. One about the timings, inquiries being responded to, and not all complaints were quite mixed. Some councillors were very happy with timing in responses, others were not. Particularly from experienced councillors, direct contact with officers that they'd previously had and were now lacking, we're not happy with. The right to reply when a question, when you didn't get the answer you expected or more detail needed what to do, and that the inquiry form was time-consuming for them, more complicated than it needed to be. After much discussion at various meetings, and thanks to councillors Oliver and William who came and contributed when invited. As a result, we came up with 4 recommendations, which are that councillors should use the email address as the simplest method to put in the inquiries. Member.feedback UK, and use the guidance to submit any inquiry. Secondly, councillors should raise issues via this system and can expect a response from the appropriate officer. We are entitled to question that response via the system, but if we remain unsatisfied after multiple attempts, we may raise the inquiry with the appropriate cabinet member. Thirdly, feedback reports that we get in the spreadsheet should be customizable, and we should be able to request what frequency we want these reports. Fourthly, the performance data from the system will be presented to this scrutiny committee on an annual basis. So, go through them again to address where I feel we have addressed most of the issues raised from councillors. So, there are 3 ways to submit an inquiry. Send an email to the email address, fill in the online form in the portal, or call them back. Most members were already just using the email and found that the simplest way to put something in. But if we wanted to use the form, it wasn't pre-populated, it was time-consuming to fill in and quite annoying to do. This has been one of the most frustrating parts, but we haven't managed to simplify that form for a few reasons, in that it's not just councillors that use that form and that system. Our MPs use that to put in many inquiries themselves, and actually all complaints that come from anyone in the public goes through that system. So, for annoying IT reasons, we weren't able to make that form just for one XP. And ultimately, we found the best thing to do is to use the email address, which most councillors are doing. And we will resubmit the guidance to just outline exactly the few key points that want to be on an inquiry in your email. Help the team. You can still ring up and you can still use the form
but the simplest way is to use the email. The fact of not getting direct contact with officers that councillors used to have, and the how to respond when we don't get the answer we want, I think are addressed in our second recommendation. And that Councillor Oliver's made it clear to us, no councillor has been forbidden from speaking to an officer. It's just really strongly recommended. Please can all councillors use the system. It is the best way going forward to monitor the hundreds of queries that come in. And it is the best method to do. And equally, and it will be passed to the appropriate officer by the team. When we get an answer back and we need more information, we can simply reply to the email. Keep responding, say, I need more information. However, the query needs to progress. You can reply, and it is a simple method to do it. If after repeated attempts, the councillor has not got the answer desired, they can then raise this at any point with the cabinet member. Now, this makes sense on two parts, and then one is the question might simply not be getting answered properly, or for every reason the officer has not done their job and answered the query that you have. In which case, the cabinet member needs to be told your department is not operating as it should be and answering the question of an elected councillor. Secondly, if you haven't got the desired answer, it may be that the officers have given the correct response, just not the answer that the councillor wanted. And that is probably down to the policy and procedure being followed by this council has been followed correctly. It's just not what a certain councillor wanted to do. In which case, ultimately, you can hold that cabinet member to account, say this council should be operating differently, should be following this policy, and ultimately that you could question them at full council meeting. You know, a political point can be made of that. It's simply that you're not getting the answer that you would like. The third recommendation is quite simple. That the feedback reports you get in the spreadsheets, we should be able to alter them as we want to help with our log all our inquiries and request how frequently we want them. Currently, we're getting them once a month. If people would like them more often, simply email the team and we should be able to get those reports when and how we want them to look. Importantly, about the timing it's taking to get a response. It's interesting that the reason this system was brought in was due to some complaints about timings of certain officers in certain departments. And we've been told repeatedly that this system will now allow us to track these things and track which departments are not performing as we'd like and answering our queries. But we were concerned that how are we going to benefit from this and when are we going to see it? And it might be well and good that the leader and his cabinet get to see this data, but we as councillors want to be able to see this, what's going on. So the performance data that is meant to be a huge benefit of the system will be gathered. We'd like to see that presented to this scrutiny committee on an annual basis. And so those are our four recommendations. It's not a perfect system and it's not going to be, but ultimately after much discussion, those are the recommendations we thought we'd like to give to cabinet. And so I'll take any questions.
Sarah, is anything you'd like to learn about that?
Just to say that happy to present a report on members' inquiries and the corporate feedback as a whole, and bring that to this scrutiny committee. Where the reunion days, I think.
Yeah, and previously those reports, before feedback reports, but
Yes.
if it's part of this, if you just want to sort of parcel it all together, I'm sure Chair's group would agree to bring that along. If that's what the committee want.
I don't mind which scrutiny we bring it to, but
It would be useful against the that's what you make. Yeah.
And for Jones, you only find it first?
I am disappointed that we can't change the form, if I really wanted to say. You know, if we've got members of parliament, councillors and others, why can't the form be variable? It's possible to do you fill that bit first and it takes you to a slightly different form. You know, it is really irritating because I never put my address because it's not on the website, so I see no reason to hand it over to a member of staff. No disrespect to the staff, but you know, there's limited number of times you can write your organisation is Northumberland County Council and your ward is Ponteland West and your political party is and your role is. You know, it's just like, is it necessary every single time?
It's, sorry to interrupt, it's not necessary and those fields are mandatory. It's only the fields that, I think it's your name and your email address are the only mandatory.
So if it starts off with the name and then next page I put the email address, that will do.
I think that's enough, yeah. I think there's a little asterisk in the box.
Yeah, seems wrong to miss them all out, but I'll go off.
So you don't need to, well, we know that information, so we wouldn't need to ask it.
Well, that's what I think, you see. I think find out.
Yeah,
know who we are.
absolutely.
So the other one, I don't know if I can ask questions on the actual process. I personally like it. I'm a member of the membership, what's the committee called? Membership committee, membership working group. And we actually specifically asked for this because, you know, there are members who will say, I always speak to the officer and I get answers straight away. But to be frank, they're probably the ones that stop the rest of us getting through. You know, I feel it's a case of who shouts loudest gets, you know. So, and it's not fair to the officer to put them in that position. So I'm very happy with a system like this. Questions that have come up since we did the thingy, whatever it's called, the questionnaire, I think you might have done it slightly early. There's no cut and paste, they won't allow a paste. So, you know, if we've got a query in from a resident, it's so much easier to cut and paste, to put it through. And following on from that, because it actually matters a lot, you can't go back. So if you get to a certain point and you think, oh, I need to do that, or you try to put the member's query and you can't remember all the wording because it won't let you cut and paste, you go back and it's gone. You know, so you get to the one about the other people in it. Usually a lot of mine are parish council ones, and I think can't remember the parish councillor's email address. You go back and you lost the whole form and start again. So those are the two big bugbears for me. If we could paste in, it would make life a lot easier and you get more accurate information. And the second one is, please don't throw me out just because I've forgotten something.
Okay, I'll check about the pasting. It might be that you need to sort of a control V rather than a, you
It
know,
might be my
right
iPad.
click.
My iPad does the most amazing wrong things, so.
You can't do that on my iPad.
A double, can you not, it might be a functionality of iPads then. But in that case, you can use the email if you know, functionality of cutting and pasting and moving things around is easier with email than doing that.
So you can still do that to the member request?
Yeah, yeah. Because then you can copy, you can, you know, include documents, etc.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on Veronica and support what Sarah's just said, I think using the members' feedback email, I started using the form back in May, and I think I used it twice, and then I got frustrated. You know, officers have had a look to try and improve the form, but because it's an archaic old system and it's ultimately being replaced, we don't want to spend money. We can't do it internally, has to be external. It would be money spent adjusting a system that we're going to replace fairly shortly anyway. So the new CRM system will sort of integrate a lot of this stuff. But you can literally, if you get an email from a parish council, you can ping it, forward it on to members' feedback with a short note saying what it is you want, you know, from the request, and then you'll get the automatic acknowledgement. It'll be included in the monthly or however frequently you choose update and so on. But just on a wider point, I mean, first of all, thank you to everybody that's been involved, and thank you for the officers. There have been some sort of tweaks made to the system as we've progressed through this process. We realise it is by no means perfect at the moment, and it will be a constant work in progress. We have just secured, so it's a long process, but the new CRM system has been the contract's been signed and work is starting on that. I'm not quite sure yet where the members' feedback fits into the sort of overall journey on the CRM system, but as soon as I do know that, I'll share it. I think
on it though.
Sorry?
Won't give up on it.
We're not going to give up on it. I remember when I first became a cabinet member 8 years ago, 8.5 years ago, being told we need a new CRM system. Finally, it's happened. So it is, it's great, and it will make a difference. I think we're not, as Ed has said, this is not to replace direct contact with officers. What we're trying to do is get a level of efficiency. Any large organisation should be monitoring its performance. It should be looking at where things are going wrong. We're now getting to the point where we've been using it for more than 6 months. We're starting to build some data. We'll be discussing how we use that data. If there are any specific problems that are reoccurring, what we need is data to be able to say, well, this is not about sort of monitoring performance of an individual officer and how well they respond to council emails. This is about what are the issues that are coming through from lots of different councillors, so we can address them at sort of a route rather than constantly responding to the same inquiry from 69 different boards all the time. It's also about making sure that the responses are the requests sent to the right person. And then they're not going at too junior level or too senior level. In a scenario, if we all reported our potholes directly to Paul Jones would never get any work done. So what we need to be able to do is actually find an efficient way to deal with things. But we will be monitoring stuff. We will be reporting it. We are going through a process at the moment looking at our KPIs and how we publicise those. So we want to challenge, and we want to work with members to all identify areas where we can improve. And we will be perfectly happy to share that with everybody as we progress.
The only way to get rid of re-form is to use email, and I'm using
What is that?
if I use the email, how does the information I put in the email, when the system, is that then randomly transferred over, will that appear in the spreadsheets and everything?
So they do have to transfer the information onto
It makes a manual
onto the
process.
system. It's a cut and paste into
Yeah.
the system, so it's
Just
not a
consider it.
huge thing. We will use the new CRM system once we've got that up and running. And we will absolutely.
The comment though, if you want to get rid of 3, 4,
Yeah, it should be. We could probably. Can we deal with that? It must be.
Well, as Councillor Oliver said, it's not just even looking at the report, so it does help to build up, regions and identifiability. But even as an existing councillor, you don't always know who is in that department. And there are times where I've emailed somebody directly and they went, "Oh, I have to move departments now." And you say, "So who's responsible?" Whereas if you just email into that address and they allocate it directly, and then you get the response back. So the new councillors, when you came in last year, and I remember going back to 2017, I had no idea. And we can't be relying on existing people to say who do I get in touch with for this. And it is a much easier system just to put it into one single email address, and it gets allocated accordingly.
Oh yeah, it was just more on a sort of from a councillor's perspective. With the current system, I've always used the email side of it, not one people in forms. Much quicker. I found the responses to be fairly quick coming back. The only thing that I do now is I just keep a little logbook, because when the email comes back, when the response comes back, you get allocated a number. And sometimes the response isn't like I'm presuming an automated response to say that they've received your email, it will be dealt with in X amount of days. But when you've got that many, it's remembering, did you get an answer? So now I just literally write the number down, a little column, just in a book. And I have to put down, you know, if there's nothing, you know, did I get a response? I just put the date of the response.
And that's one thing I did
Oh,
highlight.
because
that
it's
reference
otherwise-
number, if you have something, you say, what was that? It would have been handy to have had your query and then the answer, and then you would have.
Yeah, well, now all I do is I'll just go in and do a search. So when I've got nothing in the next column, I'll go in and do a search of the number and I'll pull everything I've had back related to that number if there's been numerous to and fro's. But it is just something that is so easy to miss.
I think that's a really good point, and I think it has been amended to include a subject summary now in the automated response, most quite recently. But one of the things that we are aspiring to is, rather than having to wait for a monthly report, is once we've sort of changed systems, because the existing system won't let us do this. But once, ultimately, the aspiration is to be able to, for members to be able to sort of effectively interrogate the system at any point, and you can get the latest status on all of your outstanding queries and see which ones have been closed and things like that, rather than getting a monthly report. But that monthly report can be automated to send to you weekly. Some of you may want it monthly, some of you may want it weekly, depending on how many issues you have to deal with, I suppose, and that'll vary by ward. But if you want to, you can request an increased frequency.
But not every query that comes in, I put through member services, because
No.
Well, council issue, it's a persimmon issue.
Yes, yeah, or even a Fix My Street issue, which is a council issue, but not through that system.
Sorry, planning doesn't go through it either, does it? Because I had one back that said they passed it on to planning, but it wasn't the appropriate way.
Was it an enforcement issue?
I remember now.
Because I had a similar thing with an enforcement issue where I got an automated response saying we forwarded this. Well, not an automated response, but a template response, I think, saying we forwarded this, but just for future reference, here's the form on the website for which actually I then remember that Alex Campbell had emailed me to tell me about that previously. So I do wonder whether that, I mean, again, that's something that we could look at, whether or not we don't want too many systems. The whole point is to try and bring them all together. Whether or not we could actually just integrate the planning inquiries into the members' feedback, and that may be something that Sarah and I could pick up on and see. I can understand the difference with Fix My Street, because that, in a sense, is a whole infrastructure of its own. But ideally, we'd want pretty much everything else to go through members' feedback.
Okay. Dave, I just want to say that when we did the consultation, the majority answer that came back was they don't like the system, they don't like it. Things weren't going. We didn't consider that. Instead, we went with a smaller cohort that said, I like the system, but if you want to. And then we hear there's a new system coming in which incorporates that sort of thing anyway. So, you know, people might want to go around confused there about being denominations. Maybe you shouldn't ask the question if you don't want to answer. This thing where members haven't been forbidden to contact officers. I was working with an officer a few weeks ago, and he said, well, we've been told not to speak to you, but haven't we solved this problem that's been going on 2.5 years in the 5-minute phone call? Guess what? I'm not going to tell you who it was, obviously, but that's the third time an officer said that to me. So do not say we can't contact them, because they've obviously been told not to speak to us.
Well, two things there, 2 points.
It wasn't experience.
The first points around the feedback to the questionnaire is, yes, take that on board, but we really do
stick a flag up for people.
Yeah, no, we really do want to have this system for the reasons I've outlined, and you know they are good reasons, and they're nothing to do with the administration. They're just to do with running the council in the best possible way, as any large organisation should. So what we want to do is actually get to the crux of why the people that didn't like the system, and not everybody didn't like it, but those that didn't like the system, why didn't they like it, so that we can fix it. And that, in essence, was the whole point of the working group, to explore those issues. Now, we can present it, we'd be very happy to present it to anybody. We're very happy to take any individual issues that people are having and try and address those, because we want it to work. We didn't predetermine anything. The system was put in for good reason, and what we're trying to do now is make it the best possible version of itself.
That's what we did. I think that's what.
And there have been, officers have been very responsive to that. Changes have been made, and what was the other point? Sorry, I forgot. You know, speak on with them. So we will speak. I mean, I'll raise it tomorrow morning with exec directors, and I will raise those concerns. Glenn has said very clearly, as leader of the council, that he doesn't want directives going out to officers saying that they're not allowed to speak to members. Now, I can't tell you whether the person that you're talking about is correct or not, because A, I don't know who it is, and B, I don't know whether it's happened. But what I can tell you, and I've heard it over and over and over again, is Glenn talking to all of the exec directors saying that this is not something that he wants. And so therefore, if it has happened, it shouldn't be happening. And it may be often, I think, get sort of a little bit lost in translation. So if officers are encouraging more junior officers to encourage members to use the system for all of the good reasons we've outlined, and that may be being interpreted as we're being told not to speak to you, then that's wrong, and we need to send out a clear message that that's not the case. So I will raise that tomorrow morning.
What we should be doing is making sure everybody understands we're part of the whole. We should all be.
No, absolutely, and that's the whole purpose of this system, is that we can get better as a council, improve our services, and deliver better services to our residents.
The final comment on this from Glenn. On the second one, we did discuss as well that if we have an inquiry, we put it in the system, but we can put in there a phone, please could I get a phone call back to help resolve this? This would be the best method. We can always request contact with somebody through the system, and they should get back to us. But on the key point of so the survey was sent out, and we asked overall what do you think of the system as a whole? 10 were dissatisfied, 7 were satisfied, and 8 in the middle. So it was a spread. But I specifically remember you, Councillor Robinson, taking us back in the second meeting saying we need to consider not having the system. And we did discuss that. That if every councillor hates the system, we should get rid of it. But that was not our conclusion. And most of us agreed that the system has a place, and particularly for new councillors, we need it, to be honest. And so I do think we did considered all options here, and decided we want to make the system better, not get rid of it.
So, as a group, Task and Finish group, thank you for the work that's been done on this and for the report for the officers. Take the recommendation forward to the government. Yes, can we get the endorsement of this committee? All agree?
Will there be an instruction going out to members to use the email rather than the phone? Because I thought that's what we decided last meeting, and it obviously didn't happen then. Will it work now?
We will organise that, yeah, that's a good point.
So item 8 is the work programme and monitoring report.
This program, so we're here, we talk and look at the network, the way I think how to do it. So that's here.
I've got no items of urgent business. Date and time of the next meeting, scheduled to take place Wednesday, 20th of May.